Imagine a world where the mighty Roman Empire, that unstoppable juggernaut of togas and aqueducts, gets a rude wake-up call from a fierce queen leading an army of painted savages. This isn't some Hollywood blockbuster with overpriced popcorn. It's the real, gritty, blood-soaked tale of the Battle of Watling Street in 61 AD. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture this: Rome's at the top of its game, strutting around like it owns the place, which, to be fair, it mostly does. Meanwhile, over in Britain, the locals are less than thrilled about their new landlords. In 61 AD, the Roman Empire is busy plastering its brand across the known world. Like some ancient corporate takeover, they've got legions, roads, and a bureaucracy that could drown you in papyrus. But in the damp, foggy corner of the empire known as Britannia, the native tribes are clinging to their muddy freedoms, their weird gods, and their absolute refusal to learn Latin just to fill out tax forms. Enter Queen Boudica, the poster child for "Don't mess with me." She's the leader of the Iceni tribe, a tall, red-haired fury with a glare that could melt iron. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had a deal with Rome. Play nice, and the Iceni get to keep their land. But when he dies, Rome's like, "Thanks for the sentiment, but we'll take it from here." They annex the kingdom, flog Boudica in public, and let's just say they treat her daughters to the kind of hospitality that makes your skin crawl. Big mistake. Boudica doesn't just get mad, she gets apocalyptic. On the flip side, we've got Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, Roman governor extraordinaire. He's the kind of guy who'd list crushing rebellions as a hobby on his resume. Suetonius is a military genius, all steely resolve and zero patience for nonsense. He's probably got a closet full of pristine togas and a knack for throwing killer dinner parties. But right now, he's knee-deep in another mess on the island of Mona, modern-day Anglesey, smashing druids like it's a Tuesday. Then word reaches him about Boudica's little uprising back east, and you can almost hear him sigh, "Jupiter's beard, not again." Boudica, though, isn't waiting for an invitation. She's rallying the Iceni and every other tribe fed up with Rome's heavy-handed rule. We're talking tens of thousands of warriors, men and women with woad smeared across their faces, axes in hand, and a grudge the size of Stonehenge. They're not here for diplomacy, they're here to burn it all down, and burn they do. First stop, Camulodunum, a shiny Roman colony. Boudica's army rolls in like a tidal wave of rage, torching everything, temples, houses, the works. The Romans there don't stand a chance. They're too busy clutching their laurels to fight back. Next up is Londinium, a bustling trade hub that's basically Rome's attempt at a British startup. Boudica's crew turns it into a bonfire, leaving nothing but ash and a few very singed egos. Verulamium gets the same treatment. It's chaos, it's carnage, and it's honestly a little impressive how much damage one ticked-off queen can do. Suetonius hears about this while he's still mopping up on Mona, and you can bet he's not thrilled. His precious province is going up in flames, and he's got a PR disaster on his hands. He rounds up his legions, about 10,000 men, give or take, and starts the long march back to deal with this Boudica problem. He's outnumbered, sure, but Suetonius isn't the type to panic. He's got discipline, training, and a knack for turning bad odds into bloody victories. The stage is set for a showdown, and it's not going to be pretty. Boudica's army keeps growing, swelling to maybe 230,000 if you believe the wilder estimates. That's a lot of angry Britons, all hyped up on vengeance and the promise of kicking Rome out for good. They're so confident, they bring their families along, wives, kids, even the family dog, setting up wagons at the back like it's a tailgate party. Meanwhile, Suetonius picks his spot with the care of a man who knows terrain can win wars. Somewhere along Watling Street, a Roman road cutting through Britain's wild heart, he finds it, a narrow defile, woods at the back, open ground in front. It's a choke point, a trap, a middle finger to Boudica's numbers. He lines up his legions, shields gleaming, javelins ready, and waits. The Britons roll in, a howling mass of fury and optimism. Boudica's up front in her chariot, hair whipping in the wind, shouting something fierce about freedom and death. Her army's a sight. chariots rattling, warriors screaming, civilians cheering from the sidelines. They've got the numbers, the passion, and the home field advantage. The Romans, they've got Suetonius, a plan, and a stubborn refusal to lose. The battle kicks off with a roar. The Britons charge, a tidal wave of spears and swords, expecting to overwhelm the Romans through sheer force. But Suetonius has other ideas. His men stand tight, a wall of iron and attitude, and let the Britons come. First move, a volley of javelins ripping through the front ranks like a grim welcome mat. Then it swords out, shields up, and the real work begins. The Britons hit hard, but they're a mess. Brave, sure, but all over the place. The Romans, though, they're a machine. Every stab, every block, it's like they've rehearsed this 1,000 times. The terrain helps too. Boudica's horde gets funneled into this narrow kill zone, and their numbers start working against them. It's like trying to herd cats into a blender. For a while, it's touch and go. The Britons keep pushing, wave after wave, their war cries echoing off the trees. The Romans hold, bloodied but unbroken, their discipline a steel thread in the chaos. Suetonius watches it all, cool as you like, waiting for his moment. Then he unleashes the cavalry, hitting the Britons' flanks like a thunderclap. That's it, the tipping point. The Britons waver, then crack. Panic spreads faster than a rumor in a tavern. They turn to run, but those wagons, those cheering families, they're in the way now, a bottleneck of doom. Warriors trip over kids, chariots crash, and the Romans don't let up. It's a slaughter. The pursuit is relentless. Legionaries cutting down anything that moves, the ground turning to mud and blood. By the end, the field's a graveyard. Tens of thousands of Britons down. Boudica's dream in tatters. She doesn't stick around for the encore. Legend says she poisons herself rather than face Roman chains. The Romans lose men too, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the carnage they've wrought. Watling Street's over and Rome's still standing. But this isn't the end of the story, it's just the bloody beginning. The rebellion's crushed, sure, but Britain's a mess, and Suetonius has some explaining to do. What happens next? How does this shape the island's future under Rome's iron grip? Stick around for part 2, because history's got more absurd twists up its sleeve, and we're not done with the pain, the irony, or the sheer madness of it all. So, Watling Street's done, and the ground's practically groaning under the weight of all the bodies. Boudica's rebellion, that fiery middle finger to Rome, lies in ruins, much like the smoldering remains of Londinium and Camulodunum. You'd think the Romans would pop open some amphorae of wine, slap each other on the back, and call it a day. But no, this is the Roman Empire, where victory's just the start of a whole new set of headaches. Welcome back to the muddy, miserable aftermath of 61 AD, where the air smells of blood, regret, and bureaucracy gone wild. Let's dive into the chaos of part 2, where the Romans try to clean up their mess, the Britons lick their wounds, and history serves up a bitter cocktail of irony and survival. The battlefield's a nightmare. Think less glorious triumph and more, someone's got to mop this up. Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, our steely-eyed Roman governor, stands atop the carnage like a man who's just won a bet but lost his favorite sandal. His legions, battered but smug, are counting their kills and probably arguing over who gets the shiniest looted torques. Estimates vary, but some say 80,000 Britons are dead. Men, women, even those poor souls who thought bringing their kids to a battle was a solid family outing. The Romans? They've lost maybe 400, a bad day for sure, but a rounding error compared to the slaughter they dished out. Suetonius, ever the pragmatist, knows this isn't the time to gloat. He's got a province in tatters, a PR nightmare, and an emperor back in Rome who's probably wondering why Britannia is such a pain in the toga. The first order of business is securing the win. Boudica's gone, either poisoned herself or slipped away into legend, depending on who's spinning the tale. Either way, her absence leaves the Iceni and their allies leaderless, demoralized, and wondering if their gods are just trolling them at this point. Suetonius doesn't waste time. He sends his legions to mop up any stragglers, burning villages, seizing livestock, and generally reminding everyone who's boss. It's brutal, it's calculated, and it's about as subtle as a gladius to the face. But here's where it gets messy. Rome's not exactly thrilled with Suetonius's methods. Sure, he won, but at what cost? Britannia's economy is in the gutter, Londinium's a pile of ash, trade stalled, and the locals are either dead or plotting round 2. Enter the bureaucrats, those papyrus-pushing vultures who smell a chance to make someone else's victory their problem. Nero, the emperor with a flair for drama and questionable life choices, gets wind of the situation. He sends a guy named Gaius Julius Alpinus Classicianus, try saying that 5 times fast, to investigate. Classicianus is the new procurator, basically Rome's tax guy with a side hustle and sniffing out incompetence. He takes one look at Suetonius's scorched earth tactics and goes, "Mate, you're making us look like the bad guys." His report back to Rome is less than glowing, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, slaughtering entire tribes isn't the best way to win hearts and minds. Suetonius, naturally, is livid. He's just saved Britannia from total collapse, and now some desk jockeys telling him he's too mean? The nerve. Meanwhile, the surviving Britons are in survival mode, and it's not pretty. The Iceni and their allies are scattered, their lands confiscated, their spirit crushed under the weight of Roman boots. Those who aren't dead or enslaved are scraping by in the woods, eating roots and cursing the day they ever heard of Rome. The Druids, those mystical weirdos who were already on Rome's hit list, are in even deeper trouble. Suetonius doubles down on his anti-Druid campaign, torching their sacred groves and making sure their creepy rituals are a thing of the past. It's not just about control, it's personal. He wants Britannia to know resistance is futile. But here's the irony. Rome's victory is starting to look like a loss. The province is a wreck, and the locals hate them more than ever. Classicianus, with his fancy title and fancier ideas, pushes for a softer touch. He argues that maybe Rome should try, governing instead of just killing everyone. Nero, who's probably distracted by his latest loot performance, agrees to swap Suetonius out for someone less likely to start a war over breakfast. Enter Publius Petronius Turpilianus, a governor who's less smite first, ask questions later, and more, let's build some roads and call it progress. Suetonius gets recalled to Rome, where he's probably expecting a parade but gets a polite thanks, but maybe retire. The Britons, meanwhile, are left to rebuild under Rome's watchful eye. New forts pop up, taxes get tighter, and the surviving tribes learn the hard way that Roman peace means do what we say or else. Some integrate, picking up Latin and togas like it's no big deal. Others simmer, dreaming of the day they can stick it to Rome again. Spoiler, that day's a long way off. The Battle of Watling Street didn't just end a rebellion, it redrew the lines of power in Britannia. Rome's here to stay, but the cost is a province that's half ashes, half resentment. The tribes learn to play the game. Some become Romanized, others just grit their teeth and wait. And somewhere, in the fog of history, Boudica's ghost is probably shaking her head, wondering why she didn't just move to Gaul. What's next? Will Rome's new approach actually work? Or is this just a pause before the next explosion? Part 3's coming, and it's got more twists, more pain, and enough historical absurdity to make you question why anyone thought empire building was a good idea. Stay tuned. The dust has settled on Watling Street, or at least as much as it can when the ground's soaked with blood and shattered dreams. Britannia, 61 AD, is a province teetering on the edge of chaos, held together by Roman grit and a whole lot of denial. Boudica's rebellion is a smoking ruin, her warriors scattered, her legend already growing like some grim campfire tale. Rome's still standing, but it's wobbling, like a gladiator who took one too many hits to the head. Welcome to part 3 of our saga, where the Romans try to glue their broken province back together, the Britons grit their teeth through the occupation, and history serves up a masterclass in how to win a battle, but lose the vibe. Let's dive back into the muck, where survival's a daily grind and irony's thicker than a British fog. Publius Petronius Turpilianus, Rome's new governor, steps into the mess like a man who's just been told to clean up after a particularly rowdy Saturnalia. Unlike Suetonius, who treated Britannia like a punching bag, Turpilianus is all about the soft sell. He's got a mandate to stabilize, not pulverize. Think less sword-swinging lunatic and more bureaucrat with a vision board. His plan? Build stuff, tax stuff, and hope the locals don't notice they're still under Rome's boot. Roads, forts, and bathhouses start popping up like mushrooms after a rain, each one a shiny reminder that Rome's here to stay. The Britons, meanwhile, are in no mood for Roman renovations. The Iceni and their allies are licking their wounds, their numbers decimated, their lands snatched up faster than you can say eminent domain. Those who survived Watling Street are either hiding in the marshes, plotting in whispers, or trying to figure out how to pay Roman taxes with nothing but a few sheep and a bad attitude. The tribes that didn't join Boudica's party, either because they were smart or just late to the invite, are playing nice, or at least pretending to. They're learning Latin, wearing togas, and nodding along when the Romans talk about civilization like it's a gift. But don't be fooled. Underneath the forced smiles, there's a simmering rage that could boil over any second. Turpilianus knows this, and he's not dumb enough to ignore it. He starts offering carrots instead of sticks, land deals for cooperative chieftains, a bit of leniency on taxes, maybe even a fancy Roman title for the right kind of sellout. It's classic empire stuff. Divide, conquer, and throw in a free aqueduct to seal the deal. But the carrot approach only goes so far when half the province still smells like ash. Londinium, Camulodunum, and Verulamium are ghost towns. They're rebuilding slow and painful. Merchants are broke, farmers are starving, and the Druids, those weird beardy mystics, are practically extinct after Suetonius's anti-hippie crusade. The economy's a wreck, and Rome's starting to wonder if Britannia's worth the hassle. Back in the capital, Nero's too busy strumming his lyre and dreaming of Olympic glory to care much, but his advisors are sweating. They need Britannia's tin, grain, and slaves to keep the empire's engine humming, and right now, the province is producing more grudges than goods. Enter the Roman propaganda machine, which kicks into overdrive. Statues of Nero start appearing, looking suspiciously more buff than the real deal. Temples to Roman gods get slapped up next to sacred Celtic groves, like a divine middle finger. The message is clear. Rome won, the gods approve, and you better get in line. But the Britons aren't exactly buying it. For every chieftain who takes the Roman bribe, there's another hiding in the hills, sharpening his spear and muttering about revenge. The Trinovantes, who got burned hard in Boudica's uprising, are especially bitter. They're stuck rebuilding Camulodunum while Roman tax collectors hover like vultures. Some tribes start playing the long game, integrating just enough to avoid trouble but keeping their old ways alive in secret. It's a tightrope walk. Too Roman, and you're a traitor. Too rebellious, and you're dead. The Roman army, meanwhile, is stretched thin. Suetonius's legions took a beating at Watling Street, and reinforcements from the continent are slow to arrive. The forts along Watling Street and beyond are understaffed, and the soldiers are grumpy. Turns out, guarding a rainy island full of hostile locals isn't as glamorous as conquering Gaul. Mutiny's not on the table, but you can bet there's a lot of griping over watered-down wine. Turpilianus leans hard on his auxiliaries, non-Roman troops from places like Germania and Hispania, who are cheaper and frankly more expendable. They patrol the roads, break up fights, and occasionally get ambushed by Britons who haven't gotten the memo about Rome's invincibility. And then there's the cultural fallout. Rome's pushing hard to Romanize Britannia, but it's like trying to teach a bear to use a fork. The locals cling to their gods, their languages, their weird obsession with chariots. In the countryside, away from Roman eyes, rituals continue. Maybe not the full-on human sacrifice stuff, but close enough to make the legionaries nervous. In the towns, you've got a new class of Britons, half Roman, half Celt, stuck in the middle and not thrilled about it. They're the ones building villas, speaking pidgin Latin, and pretending they don't miss mead. It's a weird hybrid world, and nobody's quite sure if it's progress or just a fancy cage. By the time Turpilianus hands over the governor gig a few years later, Britannia's, well, not exactly thriving, but not on fire either. The rebellion's a memory, but it's left scars. Literal ones on the landscape, figurative ones in the hearts of every Briton who watched Boudica's dream go up in smoke. Rome's grip is tighter, but it's shaky, like a parent who knows their kid's only behaving because they're grounded. The tribes are quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. What's next? Will Britannia ever bend the knee for real? Or is this just the calm before another round of chaos? Part 4 is coming, and it's packed with more Roman scheming, British stubbornness, and the kind of historical absurdity that makes you glad you're watching from the future. Stay tuned. Here we are, at the tail end of our bloody, muddy romp through 61 AD Britannia, where the Battle of Watling Street left a mark deeper than a gladius in a bad mood. The fires of Boudica's rebellion are out, but the embers are still glowing, and Rome's trying to build an empire on ground that's half graveyard, half grudge. Part 4 picks up where the last left off, with Britannia stuck in Rome's grip, the locals simmering with resentment, and history dishing out a final helping of irony, absurdity, and the kind of survival that makes you wonder why anyone bothered getting out of bed in the 1st century. Let's wrap this saga up with a bow made of sarcasm and a few lingering screams from the past. Publius Petronius Turpilianus, our let's all calm down governor, has been working overtime to make Britannia less of a dumpster fire. He's built roads, slapped up forts, and handed out Roman citizenship like it's clearance sale swag. But let's be real, the Britons aren't exactly lining up to thank him. The province is a patchwork of sullen tribes, half-baked Roman towns, and a lingering sense that things could go south faster than a chariot with no brakes. Turpilianus' soft-touch approach has kept the peace. Barely, but it's like putting a bandage on a severed limb. The real question is whether Rome can turn this soggy island into a proper province, or if it's doomed to be the empire's problem child forever. The Britons are split. Some tribes, like the ones who sat out Boudica's rebellion, are playing ball. They're building villas, learning to love olive oil, and naming their kids things like Marcus to score points with the local centurion. These are the sellouts, the ones who've decided that Roman plumbing is worth a little cultural surrender. But out in the hills and bogs, the diehards are still muttering about Boudica, sharpening their spears, and teaching their kids to hate togas. The Licini and Trinovantes, hit hardest by Watling Street, are a shadow of their former selves. Their lands are carved up, their leaders either dead or bribed into submission, and their pride's taken a beating worse than a gladiator in the Colosseum's discount league. Yet, whispers of resistance linger, like a bad smell Rome can't quite air out. Rome, for its part, is doubling down on the whole civilization shtick. New governors roll in after Turpilianus, each with their own flavor of imperial ambition. They push for more towns, more taxes, more everything. Londinium's getting a facelift, rising from its ashes like a phoenix with a Roman accent. Camulodunum's back in business, complete with a shiny new temple to Emperor Claudius, because nothing says we're sorry for the massacre, like a giant statue of a guy who's never set foot here. Verulamium's rebuilding too, and the Romans are tossing in bathhouses and amphitheaters to keep the locals distracted. Bread and circuses, baby, just without the bread, because the harvest's still a mess. The economy's limping along, and it's not helping that Rome's tax collectors are about as popular as a plague. The Britons are squeezed for every last coin, grain sack, and slave, and the ones who can't pay get a one-way ticket to a labor camp or worse. The legions are still spread thin, patrolling a province that's too big, too wild, and too full of people who'd rather stab them than salute. The auxiliaries, those hired guns from Germania and beyond, are doing the grunt work. But they're not exactly thrilled to be stuck in a place where the weather's awful and the locals throw rocks for fun. Every now and then, a skirmish flares up, a village that forgets to pay taxes, a chieftain who gets too mouthy, a druid caught muttering curses in the woods. Rome stomps these out quick, but it's like playing whack-a-mole with a very angry mole. The cultural clash is where things get really juicy. Rome's pushing hard to make Britannia look like a mini Italy, complete with forms, mosaics, and people pretending they like wine more than ale. But the Britons are stubborn. In the countryside, they're still praying to their weird gods, holding secret festivals, and telling stories about Boudica like she's coming back any day now. In the towns, you've got this bizarre hybrid culture, Britons in togas who still paint their faces for parties, Roman soldiers eating local stew because the supply ships are late, and everyone pretending they understand each other's terrible accents. It's less a melting pot and more a stew where the ingredients are fighting. Long-term, Rome's betting on assimilation to do what swords couldn't. They're training Briton kids in Roman schools, teaching them to read Virgil and calculate taxes. They're turning chieftains into magistrates, giving them fancy titles and fancier debts. It's a slow grind, but it's working. Sort of. By the end of the 1st century, Britannia is starting to look like a proper province. The roads are busy, the towns are growing, and the rebellions are fewer and farther between. But it's a brittle kind of peace. The Britons never forget Watling Street, and neither do the Romans. Boudica's name becomes a ghost story for both sides, a warning to Rome about pushing too hard, a spark for Britons dreaming of freedom. The empire rolls on, of course. Britannia's tin and grain keep flowing, the legions keep marching, and Nero's successors keep demanding bigger statues. But the cost of Watling Street lingers. Rome's victory came at the price of a province that's never quite tame, never quite loyal. The Britons adapt, survive, and sometimes thrive, but they carry the scars of 61 AD like a badge. And somewhere in the fog of history, Boudica's watching, probably rolling her eyes at how it all turned out. So, what's the takeaway from this bloody, absurd mess? Rome won the battle, sure, but empires are built on more than just swords and swagger. Britannia is a reminder that you can conquer a land, but hearts and minds? That's a tougher fight. And with that, our tale of Watling Street wraps up, not with a bang, but with a weary sigh from a province that's learned to live with its conquerors, for better or worse. Thanks for sticking with us through the carnage, the irony, and the sheer madness of it all. Until next time, keep your shields up and your grudges sharp. Picture this: a narrow mountain pass, a handful of sweaty, bronze-clad Spartans, and a Persian army so massive it could probably blot out the sun with its ego alone. This is 480 BC, and the Battle of Thermopylae is about to go down as the ultimate underdog story, or a masterclass in how to make a bad situation epically worse. Hey guys, strap in for a tale of grit, glory, and the kind of stubbornness that only comes from people who think leg day is a personality trait. Before you settle in, hit that like and subscribe button, but only if you're ready for some historical insanity. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who's joining this wild ride. Now, grab a drink, maybe crank up the AC for that dramatic breeze, and let's dive into the chaos of Thermopylae. We're in Greece, a land of city-states that can't agree on anything, except that olives are awesome and Persians are not. Enter Xerxes, king of the Persian Empire, a guy with a beard so majestic it probably has its own fan club. He's decided Greece looks like a nice addition to his already ridiculous empire, which stretches from India to Egypt and has more gold than a modern rapper's dental work. Xerxes isn't here to negotiate, he's here to conquer, and he's brought an army that, depending on who you ask, ranges from a lot to did they bring the entire population of Asia? Let's call it a couple 100,000, give or take a few camels. On the other side, we've got the Greeks, who are less an army and more a bickering book club with spears. Leading the charge, or rather the suicidal last stand, is Leonidas, king of Sparta. This guy's the human equivalent of a protein shake. Tough, no nonsense, and probably allergic to smiling. Sparta's a place where kids are raised on pain and discipline, where retreat is a dirty word, and where a good death is basically a career goal. Leonidas gets word that Xerxes is coming with his shiny invasion force, and instead of running for the hills, he's like, cool, let's pick a fight in a place where we're guaranteed to get crushed. That place? Thermopylae, a narrow pass between cliffs and the sea, so tight it's like the gods designed it for maximum bloodshed. The Greek plan is simple: hold the pass, slow Xerxes down, and hope the other city-states stop arguing long enough to send backup. Leonidas rounds up 300 of his best Spartans, each one a walking slab of muscle who's probably never heard of self-doubt. He's also got a few thousand allies from other Greek cities, like Thespians and Thebans, who are slightly less enthusiastic about dying for glory, but still show up because, well, peer pressure. The total Greek force is maybe 7,000, which sounds decent until you remember they're facing an army that could probably fill a stadium. Xerxes, meanwhile, is rolling deep. His army's a multicultural nightmare: Persians, Medes, Assyrians, even some unlucky Greeks who got conscripted along the way. They've got everything: infantry, cavalry, archers, and enough supplies to throw a party for half the known world. Xerxes is so confident, he's got his throne set up on a hill to watch the Greeks get steamrolled, probably with a goblet of wine and a smug grin. He sends a messenger to Leonidas, offering to spare the Greeks if they just hand over their weapons. Leonidas, in what might be history's first mic drop moment, replies, "Come and take them." Game on. The Persians kick things off by marching into the pass, expecting to roll over the Greeks like they're speed bumps. But Thermopylae's geography is a cruel mistress. The pass is so narrow that only a fraction of Xerxes' army can fight at once, like trying to pour an ocean through a straw. The Spartans, with their long spears, heavy shields, and frankly unhinged commitment to violence, form a phalanx, a wall of bronze and bad intentions. The Persians charge, and it's a bloodbath. Wave after wave crashes into the Greek line, only to get stabbed, slashed, and sent packing. The Spartans are in their element, fighting in tight formation, probably trash-talking the Persians between thrusts. Day 1 ends with the Persians frustrated, their dead piling up, and Xerxes probably wondering if he should have stayed home. Day 2? More of the same. The Persians try their elite troops, the Immortals, who are supposed to be invincible, but apparently didn't get the memo about Spartan spears. The Greeks hold firm, using the pass to neutralize Xerxes' numbers. The allies pitch in too. The Thespians are surprisingly clutch, and even the Thebans manage not to screw it up. For a moment, it looks like the Greeks might actually pull this off. Leonidas is out there, shield high, beard flowing, looking like he was born for this exact moment. But here's where history gets its cruel little twist. A Greek traitor named Ephialtes, because of course there's a traitor, slips over to the Persian side and spills the beans about a mountain path that loops around the pass. Xerxes, who's not above cheating, sends his immortals up this goat trail to flank the Greeks. By the time Leonidas gets wind of this, it's too late. The Persians are coming from behind and the Greek position is about to become a death trap. Most commanders would call it quits, but Leonidas isn't most commanders. He sends the bulk of his allies away, partly to save them, partly because he knows the real show's about to start. The 300 Spartans, plus about 1,100 Thespians and Thebans who refuse to bail, stay behind for what they know is a one-way ticket. The final stand is coming, and it's going to be the kind of epic that makes poets weep and bards run out of adjectives. What happens next? Will the Spartan sacrifice mean anything, or is it just a glorious middle finger to an empire? Stick around for part 2 because this tale of blood, betrayal, and bronze is just getting started, and history's got more pain to dish out. The sun's barely up on day 3 at Thermopylae, and the air is already thick with sweat, blood, and the kind of tension that makes you wish you'd called in sick to history. It's 480 BC, and the narrow pass is a meat grinder, littered with Persian bodies and the shattered dreams of Xerxes' ego. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, backed by a scrappy crew of Thespians and Thebans, are holding the line against an army so big it could probably invade the moon. But the Greeks just got the worst news since someone invented taxes. A traitor named Ephialtes has shown the Persians a mountain path to flank them. The noose is tightening, and this is where our tale gets grim, glorious, and gloriously grim. Welcome to part 2, where the Spartans stare death in the face, Xerxes learns the cost of betrayal, and history serves up a buffet of pain with a side of irony. Let's dive back into the madness. The Greek camp is buzzing with the kind of urgency you get when you know you're about to be surrounded. Leonidas, looking like he's carved from granite and bad decisions, gets the report about the goat path. It's not just a path, it's a backdoor to disaster, winding through the mountains and spitting the Persians out behind the Greek lines. Most of the allied troops, those 7,000 or so from various city-states, are still in the pass, but their morale's wobbling like a chariot with a busted wheel. Leonidas, though, is all in. He's not here to survive, he's here to make a point. He calls a council, probably while polishing his spear and glaring at anyone who looks nervous. The plan's simple. Most of the allies will retreat to fight another day, while the Spartans and a few diehards stay to hold the pass. The Thespians, led by a guy named Demophilus who's clearly got a death wish, volunteer to stay, about 700 of them. The Thebans, maybe 400 strong, also stick around, though some historians whisper they were voluntold by Leonidas to avoid any funny business. That leaves roughly 1,400 Greeks to face the Persian horde. Against maybe 200,000, math isn't on their side, but Spartans don't do math, they do defiance. Xerxes, up on his fancy hilltop throne, is probably sipping something expensive and wondering why these Greeks won't just roll over. He's thrown everything at them, infantry, archers, his elite immortals, and all he's got to show for it is a pile of corpses and a headache. But this mountain path changes everything. He sends a chunk of his forces, led by the immortals, to sneak around and trap the Greeks. By dawn, the Persians are in position, and the trap's sprung. The Greeks in the pass can hear the distant clatter of armor from behind. Never a good sign. Leonidas doesn't blink. He repositions his men, likely in a wider formation to cover both ends of the pass, and tells them to eat breakfast like it's their last meal. Spoiler, it is. The final stand kicks off with the Persians attacking from both sides, a classic pincer move that'd make any general proud. The Greeks, outnumbered and outflanked, don't bother with fancy tactics. They fight like men who know they're already legends. The Spartans form the core. their phalanx a bristling hedgehog of spears and shields. The Thespians are right there with them, proving they're not just sidekicks, while the Thebans, well, they try, but some of them are already eyeing the exit. The Persians come in waves, arrows darkening the sky, infantry charging with everything from curved swords to sheer desperation. The narrow pass still helps, but it's not enough. The Greeks are surrounded, and the fighting's so close you can smell the enemy's breakfast, probably something with lentils. For hours, it's chaos. Spears snap, shields crack, and the ground turns to mud with blood and sweat. Leonidas is in the thick of it, hacking away like he's auditioning for a statue. The Spartans fight with a precision that's almost insulting, each man covering his neighbor, their formation holding even as the bodies pile up. The Thespians match them blow for blow, their courage the kind that makes you wonder why they don't get more credit. The Thebans, though, start to crack. Some surrender, claiming they were forced to fight, which is the ancient equivalent of "my dog ate my homework." The Persians don't care. They're too busy trying to overwhelm this tiny band of lunatics. Xerxes, watching from his throne, must be torn between admiration and annoyance. These Greeks are dying, sure, but they're taking an absurd number of Persians with them. The immortals, supposed to be the best of the best, are getting schooled by men who think a good day is one where you die well. As the day wears on, the Greek line thins. Leonidas takes a hit, nobody's sure when or how, but he goes down, probably still shouting insults. The Spartans rally around his body, fighting to keep the Persians from claiming it like some grisly trophy. It's a losing battle, but they make the Persians pay for every inch. By midday, the Greeks are pushed back to a small hill, their numbers dwindling to a handful. The Persians, sensing the end, unleash a final barrage of arrows, turning the sky into a storm of death. The last Spartans and Thespians fall, their shields up, their defiance unbroken. The Thebans who didn't surrender are cut down or captured. Thermopylae is over, and the pass is Persian. Xerxes walks the battlefield, probably expecting to feel like a conqueror. Instead, he's got a pile of dead immortals, a trashed army, and a grudging respect for these insane Greeks. He finds Leonidas's body, orders it mutilated, head on a pike, classic tyrant move. But even that feels petty. The Greeks lost, sure, but they've made Thermopylae a legend, a story that'll outlast Xerxes' empire. The pass is open, and Persia's path to Greece is clear, but at what cost? The Greeks who retreated are regrouping, the city-states are finally getting their act together, and the sacrifice at Thermopylae has bought them time and a whole lot of inspiration. What's next? Will Xerxes steamroll Greece, or has he just woken a sleeping giant? Part 3's coming, and it's packed with more blood, more betrayal, and enough historical absurdity to make you glad you're not wearing sandals in a war zone. Stay tuned. Thermopylae is a graveyard now, a narrow pass choked with bodies, broken spears, and the echoes of 300 Spartans who decided death was better than surrender. It's 480 BC, and the Battle of Thermopylae has just ended with a Persian victory that feels more like a punch to the ego than a triumph. Xerxes, king of the world's flashiest empire, is standing on a blood-soaked hill, probably wondering why these Greeks had to make everything so difficult. Leonidas and his crew are gone, their last stand already turning into the kind of story that'll keep bards employed for centuries. But the war's far from over, and Greece is about to get messier than a taverna after a wine-soaked brawl. Welcome to Part 3, where the Persians march on, the Greeks scramble, and history dishes out a fresh batch of irony, desperation, and the kind of survival that makes you glad you've got Wi-Fi instead of a spear. Let's jump back into the chaos. Xerxes is riding high, or at least trying to. His army's through the pass, and Greece is wide open. Athens, Sparta, all those squabbling city-states are now in his crosshairs. But the cost of Thermopylae stings. He's lost thousands, maybe tens of thousands of troops. Good ones too, including his precious immortals, who turned out to be less immortal than advertised. His army's still massive, but it's bruised, and the men are starting to wonder if these Greeks are secretly made of iron. Xerxes orders the battlefield cleared, probably to hide the embarrassing body count, and has Leonidas's head stuck on a pike as a warning. It's less intimidating than he hopes. Mostly, it just makes the Greeks madder. Meanwhile, the surviving Greek allies who retreated from Thermopylae are hauling sandals back to their cities, spreading the news like it's the ancient equivalent of a viral post. Spartans dead, Persians coming. Also, we're screwed. The city-states, which have spent years bickering over who gets the best olive groves, are finally realizing they need to get their act together. Athens, led by a slick strategist named Themistocles, is already planning the next move. They know Xerxes is headed for Attica, and Athens is the shiny prize he wants to add to his trophy case. The Athenians start evacuating their city, shipping women, kids, and old folks to nearby islands like Salamis. It's chaos. Imagine trying to organize a mass exodus with no smartphones, just a bunch of panicky dudes shouting over donkeys. Sparta, meanwhile, is licking its wounds but not backing down. They've lost their king, but their whole death before dishonor vibe means they're already training the next batch of muscle-bound lunatics. The other city-states, Corinth, Thebes, and the rest, are grudgingly forming an alliance because nothing says teamwork like an existential threat. Back with the Persians, Xerxes is moving south, his army stretching across the landscape like a locust swarm with better armor. They roll through Boeotia, where some locals, like the Thebans who surrendered at Thermopylae, decide to play nice with the invaders. Others resist, and Xerxes isn't feeling merciful. Towns that don't bow get burned, their people enslaved or worse. It's standard empire stuff, but it's not winning hearts and minds. By the time Xerxes reaches Attica, Athens is a ghost town. The Athenians have left behind a few diehards to guard the Acropolis, but it's a token effort. The Persians sack the city, torching temples and smashing statues like it's a frat party gone wrong. Xerxes probably thinks this is it. Greece is done, time to carve his name on the ruins. But Themistocles has other plans. He's betting everything on the sea. The Greeks have a fleet, maybe 300 ships strong, parked near the island of Salamis. It's not as big as Persia's navy, which is like a floating city with oars, but it's nimble, and Themistocles is a master at playing dirty. He knows the Persians are coming for a naval showdown, and he's ready to turn the narrow straits of Salamis into Thermopylae 2.0, except with boats. Themistocles pulls a classic Greek move, trickery. He sends a double agent to Xerxes, claiming the Greek fleet's about to scatter. Xerxes, who's apparently never heard of too good to be true, takes the bait and sends his navy into the straits, expecting an easy win. Instead, the Persians get funneled into a tight space where their numbers are useless, just like at Thermopylae. The Greek triremes, fast and vicious, ram and sink Persian ships left and right. Xerxes, watching from another conveniently placed throne, sees his navy get shredded. It's a disaster, and for the first time, the great king's starting to sweat. The Battle of Salamis, fought just weeks after Thermopylae, flips the script. The Greeks lose maybe 40 ships. The Persians lose hundreds. Xerxes' invasion is still alive, but it's on life support. He leaves a chunk of his army in Greece under his general Mardonius and hightails it back to Persia, probably muttering about how nobody warned him about these crazy Greeks. The land war is still on, though. Mardonius sticks around, wintering in Thessaly and planning a spring offensive. The Greeks, buoyed by Salamis, are finally acting like a team. Sparta's ready to lead the charge. Athens is playing the long game, and even the smaller city-states are pitching in. Thermopylae's sacrifice wasn't just a heroic last stand. It bought time, rallied the Greeks, and showed the Persians they're not invincible. But the fight's far from over. Mardonius is no slouch, and he's got enough troops to make Greece regret not surrendering. What's next? Will the Greeks keep their momentum, or will Persia's sheer size crush them? Part 4 is coming, and it's got more battles, more betrayal, and enough historical absurdity to make you wonder why anyone thought invading Greece was a good idea. Stay tuned. The fires of Thermopylae are cold now, but Greece is still burning, figuratively and literally, as 480 BC rolls into 479 BC. Xerxes' grand invasion, once a juggernaut of Persian might, is wobbling like a chariot with a loose wheel after the Greeks humiliated his navy at Salamis. The ghost of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans looms large, their sacrifice at Thermopylae a rallying cry that's got the Greeks finally acting like they might survive this. But the Persians aren't done, and the stakes are higher than a philosopher's ego. Welcome to Part 4, where the Greeks try to finish what Thermopylae started, the Persians cling to their dreams of conquest, and history serves up a final course of blood, betrayal, and the kind of stubborn survival that makes you glad you're not. Dodging spears in a toga. Let's wrap this epic with enough irony and absurdity to choke a hydra. Xerxes, after watching his navy get turned into driftwood at Salamis, has had enough of Greece's nonsense. He hightails it back to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius to clean up the mess. Mardonius is no rookie. He's got a knack for war and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Acropolis. He's wintering in Thessaly with a trimmed down but still massive army, maybe 50,000 strong, including some Greek turncoats who've decided Persian gold beats Greek pride. His plan? Hit the Greeks hard in the spring, crush their newfound unity, and make sure Xerxes' throne doesn't look like a bad investment. The Greeks, meanwhile, are riding high off Salamis, but not exactly popping the amphora yet. Athens is a smoldering ruin, its people scattered across islands, living like refugees with a grudge. Sparta's itching for a rematch, their new leaders ready to prove they're just as tough as Leonidas. The other city-states, Corinth, Thebes, and a dozen others, are finally on board, forming a shaky alliance that's one bad argument away from collapsing. Themistocles, Athens' resident genius, is still pulling strings, but the real action's shifting to the land, where the Greeks are mustering every able-bodied man who can hold a spear without tripping. Spring 479 BC brings the showdown everyone's been dreading. Mardonius moves south, reoccupying Athens because apparently he loves the smell of ashes. He offers peace terms, join the Persian team, keep your cities, maybe get some shiny coins. The Athenians, who've had it with Persian interior decorators, tell him to shove it. Mardonius, annoyed, starts burning what's left of Attica, while the Greeks gather their forces near Plataea, a flat plain perfect for the kind of all-out brawl that decides empires. The Greek army, led by Sparta's Pausanias, Leonidas' cousin and a man with zero chill, numbers about 40,000, a mix of hoplites, archers, and guys who probably wish they'd stayed home. It's not Thermopylae's choke point. This is open ground, and the Persians have cavalry, which is like bringing a tank to a knife fight. The Greeks know they're outnumbered, but Thermopylae and Salamis have them feeling like they've got the gods on speed dial. The Battle of Plataea is a messy, drawn-out affair. For days, the two sides skirmish, probe, and posture. Mardonius' cavalry harasses the Greeks, cutting off their water supply and making everyone cranky. The Greeks, stubborn as ever, hold their ground, their phalanxes bristling like porcupines with a point to prove. Pausanias plays it smart, keeping his men disciplined, but supply lines are tight and morale's wobbling. Then, in a move that's either genius or desperation, the Greeks fake a retreat, luring Mardonius into thinking they're breaking. He takes the bait, sending his army charging after them. Big mistake. The Greeks wheel around, their phalanxes locking into place like a steel trap. The Spartans lead the charge, tearing into the Persians with the kind of fury that makes you wonder if they're human or just very angry statues. The Athenians hold the flanks, keeping the Greek traitors at bay, while the rest of the alliance piles in. It's chaos, spears snapping, shields splintering, horses screaming. Mardonius fights like a man possessed, but he's no match for a Spartan spear to the chest. When he falls, the Persian army unravels like a cheap tunic. The rout is brutal. The Greeks chase down the fleeing Persians, turning the plain into a slaughterhouse. By the end, Mardonius is dead, his army's in tatters, and the Persian camp is looted faster than you can say spoils of war. Meanwhile, on the same day, because history loves a good coincidence, the Greek navy catches the Persian fleet napping at Mycale on the Ionian coast. They burn the ships, scatter the survivors, and basically ensure Persia's naval dreams are sunk for good. Plataea and Mycale are the 1-2 punch that breaks Xerxes' invasion. The Persians limp back to Asia, their empire still vast but their ego thoroughly bruised. Greece isn't out of the woods yet. The Persians will be back and the city-states will go right back to bickering, but Thermopylae's sacrifice wasn't for nothing. Those 300 Spartans, plus their Thespian and Theban buddies, bought time, inspired a nation, and showed the world that even empires bleed. The Greeks rebuild, slowly. Athens rises from its ashes, Sparta keeps flexing, and the idea of Greece as something worth fighting for takes root. Thermopylae becomes a legend, a story of defiance that'll echo through history, inspiring everyone from poets to guys making questionable action movies. Xerxes, back in Persia, probably spends the rest of his days muttering about Greeks and their stupid narrow passes. The cost of it all, lives, cities, dreams, is staggering, but survival always is. And with that, our tale of Thermopylae closes, a saga of bronze, blood, and the kind of stubbornness that makes history worth telling. Thanks for riding this wild, absurd journey through the pain of 480 BC. Keep your shields up, your wits sharp, and maybe don't pick a fight with an empire unless you've got a really good past to defend. Imagine the Mediterranean ablaze with anticipation. Two titans of drama, Rome's iron-willed heir Octavian and Egypt's glittering queen Cleopatra, teetering on the brink of calamity, their fates entwined like poisonous snakes in a royal garden. 10 years of whispered betrayals, salacious rumors, and back-alley assassinations crescendo here as the fate of an empire swings on the razor's edge of a single naval engagement. Autumn breezes whip across the Ionian Sea, carrying the stench of sweat and salt, as ships with billowing sails line up like gladiators in the arena. Each vessel creaks with the weight of armored legionaries. Each oar beats the rhythm of anxious hearts. Above them, the sky smirks, offering neither mercy nor reprieve. The sun glares down as if to say, "Pick your hero wisely. Today I play witness to glory and ruin alike." Octavian, the calculating nephew turned rival, watches from a rocky outcropping, cloak fluttering like a dark omen. His calf muscles tense, ready to spring, but his mind is already miles ahead, weaving contingencies like a master chess player cornering his prey. Years of subtle propaganda have twisted public opinion into obedience. He knows his legions are loyal, but the sea is a fickle mistress. He tastes iron in his mouth. Anticipation or fear, he cannot tell. Across the water, Cleopatra reclines on the deck of her flagship, the purple hull a boast of divine indulgence. She drapes herself in diaphanous linens that catch the breeze, turning her into an apparition of seductive power. Yet behind those coal-lined eyes flickers calculation and dread. Antony, her steadfast lover and co-ruler, is aboard, and his swagger, honed on foreign battlefields, masks a deep fatigue. Their alliance is as much political theater as romantic entanglement, but it's the best show in town, and the stakes are eternal. For months these two forces have circled, each seeking the perfect moment to strike. Antony's men whisper of desert campaigns in Parthia, of distant victories that offered little glory, and of a general who found comfort in Egyptian luxury more than in Roman discipline. Their once feared commander now lingers among ornate columns and temple rites, his once steely gaze softened by lotus wine and whispered compliments. Cleopatra rings him like a mistress should, but even love cannot mask the twinge of doubt in his battle-hardened soul. On one side, warships bristle with catapults, their crews chanting rhythms to steel their nerves. On the other, sleek, faster vessels, trimmed for agility, await orders whispered through conch-shell trumpets. Each helmsman knows that maneuver, not brute force, might win this day. The Ionian's shallow waters will punish the deep-draft behemoths, yet the man with the patience to draw his enemy into the wrong tide might snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. A sudden horn blast, a challenge seething through the salty haze, shatters the low hum of nerves. Antony's flagship surges forward, Cleopatra at the prow, eyes scanning for Octavian's line. With a flick of her jeweled hand, she signals her courtiers to retreat. This is no banquet, but a battlefield. The drums of Rome respond, hidden beacons flare on Octavian's flagship, a silent command bristling through the ranks. War strokes accelerate into a frantic pulse. Antony's squadron veers left, hoping to catch Octavian off guard, but the Roman commander anticipated the feint. He pivots, his ships angling into a crescent that smothers Antony's center. A triumph of discipline over daring, developers of empire over dreamers of kingdoms. Wooden hulls groan as they collide, shields splinter, and men cry out, some with rage, most with terror. Cleopatra's heart pounds beneath her gilded breastplate as she watches the trap tighten. Antony stands beside her, sword drawn, blood drying on the blade from earlier skirmishes. He leans close, voice low. "They overestimated our weakness, my queen." Her lips curve into a knowing smile, confidence forged in centuries of myth, yet even gods have trembled at the whims of fate. On the fringes, a sailor from Alexandria grips a rope so tightly his knuckles whiten. He recalls childhood stories of pharaohs commanding floods of worshippers, of the Nile surrendering at a word. Now he clings to a mast, as much a prisoner as a participant. The irony dances in his mind. He who once served gods now serves generals, and the only divinity he knows is the roar of battle. From Octavian's deck, A lieutenant shouts orders that cut through the chaos like steel. Formations shift, cutting off escape routes. Antony's scouts cry warning of Roman galleys snapping their wake. Cleopatra's flagship lists as a ramming prow tears its side. The queen's courtier, eyes wide, curses in Greek, but the language of desperation is universal. Splinters rain down. Fate's impartial hammer strikes without distinction. Antony leaps onto Cleopatra's deck, steadies her as splintered wood cracks beneath their boots. He raises his sword, rallying his men in a guttural cry that echoes across the waves. The momentary surge is glorious, but fleeting. Roman marines descend like locusts. Boarding lines clash with iron and grit. Amidst flashing blades, Antony locks eyes with a centurion who once served under Caesar. They share a nod, an acknowledgement of fraternal betrayal, and then they fight. The sea around them froths crimson. Shouts of triumph and pain mingle in a gruesome chorus. Cleopatra clamps a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream as a soldier beside her collapses, utter life ebbing into the salt water. She tastes rust on her tongue. For a queen who traded crowns with gods, this is a ritual of survival, raw and unvarnished. Above the din, Octavian's trumpet sounds again, a signal of triumph or perhaps a requiem. His ships press closer, forming an iron ring. Antony's navy, once a proud host of a great eastern power, now dwindles toward a watery graveside. Those who can row flee under cover of smoke and chaos, while the rest face the boarding pikes, their pleas drowned by the clang of metal. Cleopatra's gaze flicks to Antony, who fights with the desperation of a man who knows tomorrow does not exist. He parries a thrust, kicks a man into the sea, but his armor is scoring under every blow. The queen realizes that love can be the sweetest poison, powerful and fatal, yet she cannot yield. Even as the tide drags bodies beneath the waves, she stands firm, the last beacon of an empire slipping into shadow. Meanwhile, high on the cliffs, octagonal braziers ignite. Octavian's signal that the day belongs to him. His legions will march east, his coffers will fill, and he will claim the laurels of Augustus. But today, the sea writes a dirge for Antony and Cleopatra, two souls bound by ambition, romance, and inevitable decay. Their story, like all epic tragedies, grows richer in defeat. As the sun dips below the horizon, it finds Octavian's banner unchallenged, fluttering above a battlefield of broken oars and shattered dreams. The cheers from the triumphant vanguard mingle with distant cries of the wounded, an unsettling lullaby of conquest. In the dying light, Cleopatra gazes across the deck at Antony's fallen form, sorrow and defiance warring in her eyes. She knows this night will be etched into eternity, an absurd tapestry of gods meddling, empires crumbling, and humans caught in the relentless grind of history. And so, the first clash of that fateful day closes, a teetering moment where iron wills met seductive power, where strategy bled into desperation, and where the Mediterranean became the theater of human absurdity. The curtain falls on the prologue, but the drama is far from over. Tomorrow, the survivors will tell new tales. Tonight, the water holds their secrets, and the throne of Rome glitters with fresh ambition. The dawn cracked like a wounded soldier's skull, pale and trembling, as the survivors of Actium drifted among splinters and blood-soaked sails. For the captains and rowers who escaped the Roman crescent, morning offered no reprieve, only the grueling reality of hunger, exhaustion, and the unspoken dread that death might come, not with clashing blades, but in the silent betrayal of salt water and sunstroke. They lashed themselves to wreckage, shifting weight to stay afloat, and prayed to gods whose names they barely remembered. Above them, gulls wheeled and cried, indifferent spectators to human folly. Their sharp eyes picked out the drifting figures, but their hunger was too timid to drive them down. Instead, the birds flapped off in lazy circles as if bored by yet another spectacle of Rome's devastation. Some of the men cowered beneath overturned oars, trying to block out the memory of that crushing formation, the sickening snap of hulls, the roar of boarding parties. Others sat in stunned silence, jaws slack as if the shock had stolen their very voices. By midday, a handful of battered triremes, Antony's fastest, had managed to cut through the Roman lines and coast toward the rocky promontories of Cephallenia. Their commanders, eyes rimmed with salt and sweat, barked frantic orders to beach their ships before the tide turned. Squads of legionaries, still in armor, waded ashore like predators tasting the possibility of fresh kill. Yet these soldiers were as weary as their defeated foes. Each step felt like wading through centuries of regret. On the cliffs above, Antony and Cleopatra stood amid a ragged retinue of guards. The air smelled of ash and charred wood, evidence of signal fires raised to warn inland towns of the Roman triumph. Behind them, the remains of their fleet bobbed in the waves, a graveyard of Greek and Phoenician names etched on shattered prows. Cleopatra's purple mantle, once a banner of divine favor, lay torn and tattered across her shoulders. She grasped Antony's hand, her fingers slick with salt and something darker, fear. Antony's face was drawn, as if he'd aged decades overnight. His usual bravado had deserted him, leaving hollow cheeks and eyes that flickered with both defiance and despair. "We must flee to Alexandria," he said, voice hoarse. "Reinforcements will rally behind us, and Egypt's treasuries can hire fresh warships." His gaze flicked to the smoking horizon, where the Roman armada glinted like a serpentine spear. "But first we reclaim what we can of our honor." Cleopatra drew in a slow breath that tasted of salt and promise. "Honor?" she echoed. "Does that fill our bellies?" In her mind raced a gallery of images: granaries pillaged by Roman foragers, fields scorched by past campaigns, and peasants starving beneath a sun that dripped like molten gold. She looked at Antony, the man who had once stormed Parthian forts and drunk with centurions beneath fluttering standards. Now he was a fugitive, sharing her fate, bound by love and a cause slipping through their fingers. Around them, their courtiers and soldiers gathered what hope they could. Elephant handlers unshackled the last beasts from the deck of a stranded ship. The great beasts lumbered inland, trunks swinging, eyes full of ancient calm. They would carry the wounded and transport tents, anything to sustain a makeshift encampment. Engineers dismantled shattered catapults for firewood. Scribes scrawled desperate pleas on parchments to be carried by swift couriers into Egypt proper. Antony surveyed the reluctant salvage. "We need more than artillery," he muttered. "We need allies." His lip curled as he thought of the eastern potentates, Armenia, Judea, client kings whose loyalties had always swayed like reeds in the wind. Perhaps, he mused, the spectacle of Roman triumph would scare them into solidarity. Or perhaps they would seize the moment to curry favor with Caesar's heir. The mercurial gods of politics were never on his side. Cleopatra cut across his doubt. "Let me parley with Ptolemy in Cyprus," she offered. "My brother still rules there, and his galleys remain intact. We can coerce him through flattery or fear, or both." Her eyes glittered with strategic hunger. Unlike Antony, she had never abandoned the game board of power, even in love's most intoxicating grasp. "Give me days," she said, "and I will bind him to our destiny." Antony nodded, relief flickering. "Go then," he said, "but return swiftly." He clasped her hand. "Egypt may yet hold its queen and its general." So Cleopatra mounted a small, swift birum, purple pennants dancing overhead, and slipped away under cover of twilight. Her captain, a weathered Greek named Philostratus, urged silence among the oarsmen. They crept past Roman pickets, hugging the rocky coastline, until the lights of Cyprus shimmered like distant jewels. The night air was thick with salt and possibility. Meanwhile, on the mainland retreat, Antony faced the grim task of rallying his remaining troops. His soldiers sat in sullen circles, nursing wounds and broken spirits. Legionaries under his command had once been celebrated as heroes of Parthia and Gaul. Now they were deserters, their armor tattered, staring at the ground as if the earth itself had betrayed them. Antony dismounted his horse, dusty, exhausted, but regal, and stood before them. "Men of Rome and Egypt," he called out, voice echoing off limestone cliffs. For a moment, even the waves hushed. He drew his sword and held its point toward the sky. "We have been undone by one cunning nephew and his legions, but know this, we live, and as long as breath fills our lungs, our cause endures." A ripple of hoarse cheers answered him, soldiers pounding their shields with hollow ferocity. Antony felt the old fire kindle in his chest, the intoxicating warmth of command and sacrifice. Yet victory's ember flickered beneath Rome's thunder. Scouts reported Roman emissaries gathering at the coast, offers of parley, demands of surrender. Some spoke of brand new legions released from Spain. Others whispered that Octavian had sent envoys with coffers of gold to entice deserters. Antony's stomach twisted. Money could buy swords, but loyalty, especially the loyalty of men who'd feasted on Libertas, was costlier than all Egypt's treasures. Over the next weeks, the encampment became a microcosm of Antony's fractured realm. In one tent, Syrian archers practiced their volleys against wooden targets. In another, berserker-like Thracian cavalry drilled with frenzied vigor. Carthaginian mercenaries haggled over pay with Egyptian treasurers. Greek philosophers wandered among tents, arguing about fate and free will, as if the world's future hinged on their syllogisms. The air cracked with tension. Would Cleopatra return in time? Would Ptolemy honor his blood ties? Would Roman gold sever Antony's last bonds? By the time the sun climbed to its zenith, rumors swirled like dust devils. Some said Cleopatra had been intercepted by Roman corsairs and imprisoned. Others claimed she had won her brother's loyalty and that Cyprus's fleet would sail at dawn. Antony's advisors urged patience. Latin officers urged retreat. Every faction sniffed for advantage. Every whisper carried the weight of doom or deliverance. Then, on a night thick with stillness, a lone lamplighter crept into Antony's tent. He bowed low. "My lord," he whispered, "the queen approaches." The words sent a jolt through the general's veins, a mixture of relief, hope, and dread. He ordered the campsite's torches lit in grand procession and donned his ceremonial breastplate, the one embossed with Bacchus riding panthers. He wanted his soldiers to see their leader transformed, not a beaten man, but a king returned. At the shore, Cleopatra stepped onto the sand, her retinue forming a regal escort of archers and peltasts. The moon cast her silhouette in silver, turning her into something half mortal, half statue. Antony met her at the water's edge, each stride echoing like drum beats in the hush. She ran to him, sweeping him into an embrace as the fleet's lanterns turned the sea glass green around them. "Victory is ours," she declared, voice soft but unyielding. "Ptolemy fears Roman wrath more than our displeasure. His ships stand ready to sail under our banner." She paused, studying his face. "But more, Cyprus yields grain, timber, and gold. We need but command, and the world will kneel." Antony's heart swelled. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her brow, tasting salt and power. "Then we strike back," he said, voice low with resolve. "We sail north, gather the remnants of our allies, and reclaim our honor in Italy itself." Cleopatra's eyes glittered. Rome will rue the day it challenged Egypt. Thus, beneath the canopy of stars, the lovers quashed despair with bold ambition. They plotted to sail through the winter storms, to muster fresh legions, to shake the very foundations of the Republic. They spoke of marching on Brundisium, tearing open the peninsula like a wound, and restoring the balance of power. Each word carried the electric charge of possibility and of doom, for hope in their position was both their greatest weapon and their cruelest folly. As they set their plans, the survivors of Actium huddled around campfires, letting the flames erase nightmares of defeat. But in the flickering light, shadows danced as if mocking the fragile optimism. Sentries whispered of Roman scouts on distant ridges. Discontent brewed in the ranks, soldiers who longed to return home, villagers who longed to see their fields once more. The elephant handlers grumbled that the beasts would not survive the winter cold. Antony and Cleopatra held their court in a barn-like hall, mosaic floors buried beneath straw. Advisors crowded around a rough-hewn table, maps of the Mediterranean spread out beneath candles. Each general, each satrap, each honored guest voiced theories and grievances. Cleopatra commanded attention, her laughter ringing sharp as a blade when ideas faltered. Antony interjected with blunt pragmatism, reminding everyone that audacity must be matched with supply lines and discipline. Hours passed. Outside, wolves howled at the moon. Inside, the air trembled with tension, political, personal, and primal. The queen rose to end the session, lifting a goblet of Cyprus wine. "To our enemies," she toasted, "may their laurels wilt in winter's chill." Glasses clinked. For a moment, the camp was united by shared purpose. Yet beneath the rallying cry lay the bitter truth. History's wheel spun on, heedless of plans and pleas. One misstep, one betrayal, one hailstorm at sea could unravel everything they staked their lives upon. Antony drained his cup, feeling the wine burn like prophecy in his throat. Cleopatra's gaze met his, fierce and unwavering. They were bound, by love, by ambition, by the absurd cruelty of a world determined to crush them. So they prepared to set sail again, weary but unbowed, hearts burning with equal measures of passion and defiance. The Mediterranean lay before them once more, a shifting battlefield of waves and wind, politics and peril. Behind them stood the ghosts of Actium, ahead an uncertain map etched in blood and ambition, and at the center of it all, two souls refused to yield. In that moment, the night felt endless, but dawn would come again, bringing both promise and reckoning. Antony would need every ounce of courage, every scrap of loyalty, every fragile alliance to stand against Octavian's inexorable advance. Cleopatra would need every gift of wit, charm, and ruthlessness to hold her kingdom together. And as the first sails caught the moonlight, carrying them toward their fate, the world seemed to hold its breath. For in the relentless theater of history, Actium had been but the opening act. The true tragedy, and perhaps a final irreversible absurdity, awaited on the stage of Italy itself. And as the waves carried their fragile armada northward, the world watched, wondering whether love could conquer history, or whether history would swallow them both. Antony stood at the prow of the flagship, eyes fixed on the horizon where the Italian coastline was nothing more than a pale smear. The wind tugged at his cloak, as if trying to rip him from the world of dreams he'd spun with Cleopatra. Behind him, the battered ships of Cyprus gleamed, their sails patched, their prows scarred, but still afloat. Each vessel carried men whose faces were etched with the memory of Actium, some with rage, most with grief. They looked at their commander now, waiting for a spark to ignite renewed purpose. Cleopatra's ship drifted alongside. She appeared in a swirl of violet silk and gold trim, her hair crowned with laurel leaves that bobbed as she moved. In her hand was a scroll bearing the seal of Ptolemy, an uneasy alliance cemented by blood and coin. She stepped onto Antony's deck, and for a heartbeat, the world felt as though it might pause to admire them. A general who defied Rome, a queen who outwitted fate. Her voice, low and playful, cut through the swirl of gulls and waves. "Do you see it, my love? Italy at our feet, or at least within reach. Shall we dine on the ruins of the Republic?" Antony's grin was sharp, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "I see a gauntlet thrown at our feet," he replied, tapping his sandal against the deck. "Rome expects capitulation. We shall give them spectacle. But remember, this coast is not Greek or Egyptian. The soil remembers Roman blood." The ships dropped anchor near Brundisium as dusk gathered. Antony ordered camps pitched on the pebbled shore. Soldiers fell to the earth where they stood, carving out makeshift bunks and stoking modest fires. Spears and standards stood like stony sentinels in the gathering gloom. In the flickering light, faces appeared gaunt, haunted by memories of cedar catapults and boarding axes. A centurion lit a small fire of driftwood and pressed rations into the hands of a trembling recruit. He spat into the sand. "No more wineskins until we've taken the Senate, boy. Food first, glory later." That night, Antony summoned his lieutenants to a hollowed-out temple ruin overlooking the shore. Marble columns lay strewn like fallen giants, and the ghost of past glories whispered among cracked stones. He drew a crude map in the sand, marking roads to Capua, Rome, and the fertile plains of Campania. His finger traced the Via Appia with deliberate ferocity. "Brundisium secures our land bridge," he said. "From here, we march north, rally senators disaffected by Octavian's rise, and bring triumphant men of the east to the gates of Rome." He looked up, eyes bright. "This is not merely a war of arms, it is a trial of wills." A hush fell. Then, from the back, a voice rasped, "And what of the Senate's loyalty?" A bearded Greek veteran, his left arm in a sling, glared at Antony. "The nobles fear Octavian's gold more than any army. How do you intend to break their purse strings?" Antony met the challenge with a slow nod. "Worse still, they fear us more," he said. Gold buys loyalty only when loyalty has no price. We will promise them honor, clemency, positions in the new order. Better than coin, a senator craves survival, and influence under a triumvir who still rules half the world. He turned to an Egyptian advisor. Dispatch envoys to the old families. Remind them of the games we've staged, the warehouses we've filled, the spoil we've shared. Offer a feast in Capua. They will come, if only out of curiosity. Cleopatra, who had lingered by a shattered frieze, spoke then. And Octavia? He will send his sister as a political shield. Do you think the people will not see her tears, her imploring eyes? She tapped the map. Rome adores its tragic women. They will pity her and resent us. Antony's jaw tightened. Let them pity whom they will. When they taste the grain from our stores, see their children clothed by our banners, then pity turns to gratitude. He hesitated. And yet, perhaps you should go to Brundisium yourself. Your presence moves hearts more swiftly than any speech. She arched an eyebrow. The triumvir's sister, the daughter of Attila? Terrific. Cleopatra glanced at his lieutenants. Don't look at me that way. You'll be pleased. My gifts are more convincing than gold. She swept out of the ruin, her skirt swirling moonlight into darkness. Within hours, her little flotilla slipped ashore. She entered the town under cover of night, flanked by a handful of trusted eunuchs and snake charmers, whose hissing words distracted any prying eyes. Her chariot, disguised as that of a Roman noblewoman, rolled through narrow lanes. Torches flickered against whitewashed walls. Citizens peered from windows, whispering, "The Queen of Egypt, here? What trickery is this?" Her voice, silk over steel, offered reassurance. "I come bearing peace and grain. My brother's fields lie empty unless shared with Rome." She spoke of famine rumors in Campania, of earthquakes in Ephesus that had spared Egypt's granaries. She promised cheap grain and even cheaper rum, wine tinted with honey to flavor the text. Senators, reluctant at first, began to gather in small conspiratorial groups. In dimly lit atriums, they weighed their options: Octavian's cold efficiency versus Antony's brash generosity. Some wrote letters to their daughters in Rome, urging caution. Others sent secret riders to Octavian, reporting Cleopatra's words. To slow intelligence, she staged lavish feasts in the courtyard of Brundisium's old governor's palace. Tables groaned under fish from Alexandria, dates from Cyrene, bread baked with Egyptian yeast. She laughed, high and clear, as senators swirled wine at her side, her laughter a masterclass in political theater. And when she spoke of Antony's victories, how he'd routed Parthians, quelled revolts, each anecdote was embroidered with personal touches that flattered her audience's vanity. Meanwhile, back on the beach, Antony marshaled his infantry. Legionaries and auxilia stood in uneasy lines beneath olive trees, their breath pluming in the cool air. His veterans practiced drill maneuvers with scuffed shields. Fresh recruits, pulled from Greek villages, fumbled with gladius and scutum. Desertion was a constant threat, the promise of farms back home more enticing than endless wars. Antony watched from a dune. He fingered a carved ivory helmet he'd won at Alexandria, then tossed it to a soldier. "Build their trust," he ordered a centurion. "Discipline, yes, but also dignity. Let them fight for something they believe in." Word reached him of a detachment of Octavian's scouts probing the countryside. Antony rode out with 100 cavalry, the sky still pale with dusk. They found the scouts near a grove of oleanders, nails embedded in trees marking the route to Capua. A clash erupted, swords glinting, horses whinnying, dust rising. Antony fought on horseback, a whirlwind of sweat and steel. His gauntleted fist smashed a scout's helm. He kicked another soldier into a thorn bush. By nightfall, the scouts were dead or captured. Antony returned with 30 prisoners, battered and bleeding. He bound them and sent them back to camp. "Let them carry the tale of our ferocity," he said, "and tell Octavian that Antony bleeds as easily as any man." But every victory was tempered by news of desertion. One morning, a dozen triremes flew white flags at dawn. Their captain cited lack of pay, fear of betrayal, longing for hearth and home. Antony paced the beach, sword hilt rubbing his palm raw. They fled because they saw defeat. He snarled to his aide, "They must be shown defeat never comes without a price." He ordered his priests to sacrifice in Jove's name, then spent the day inflating victory songs to boost morale. Cleopatra returned from Brundisium bearing triumph. 3 factions of senators quieted, 2 family alliances pledged support, and the third group agreed to remain neutral, effectively hampering Octavian's influence in Italy's southeast. She rode into camp, garbed now in battle leathers trimmed with purple, her hair bound in a warrior's braid. She dismounted before Antony, who greeted her with a kiss that tasted of salt water and spice. "You danced on the edge of a volcano and lived," he said, his pride plain. She smiled wryly. "It was only Brundisium. Tomorrow perhaps I'll gamble on Rome itself." She tapped the scroll from Ptolemy again. "He'll send 20 ships at dawn. They may be crude, but they're ours. We sail for Tarentum, then push inland." Her gaze grew serious. "But Antony, what of our alliance with the Eastern kings? We still await reinforcements from Armenia and Parthia." His eyes darkened. "Parthia sends only promises. Armenia dispatches a token cavalry contingent. The world grows wary when Rome stands on its heels." He recalled the Parthian envoy's last words. "You may be a great general, but even great men become vultures for carrion empires." The barb was not lost on Antony. He turned to Cleopatra. "Our cause depends on ambition, yes, but also timing. Delay too long, and Octavian will gorge on our hesitation." Days later, the renewed fleet of Cyprus slipped away under a moonless sky. Antony led the cavalry inland, skirting marshes and narrow passes. The countryside was a tapestry of olive groves, vineyards, and farmsteads. Peasants paused in their work, their faces masks of curiosity and fear. They whispered, "Are these the liberators, or conquerors in foreign tongues?" Antony ordered aid stations set up, free medical tents run by Greek physicians, even a makeshift market where locals could trade produce for Roman coin. His generals grumbled, supplies were scarce, but Antony knew the currency of goodwill outweighed the coin of war. At Tarentum, they found a garrison loyal to Octavian. The walls were guarded by marines who eyed Antony's men with hard suspicion. He sent envoys, 2 centurions in gleaming armor, flanked by Egyptian scribes, to offer terms, safe passage in exchange for principles of neutrality. The centurions returned hours later with scorn. The marines had laughed, spat, and locked their gates tighter. Antony's pulse throbbed. He drew his sword and tapped its blade against the ground. "Then we shall hammer down their walls." The siege of Tarentum unfolded in the heat of late summer, with towers raised, catapults wheeled into position, and sappers tunneling beneath the walls. The noise of wood and stone echoed through narrow streets. Citizens huddled behind barricades, while merchants slipped away under cover of darkness. Cleopatra arrived again, this time in full battle regalia, her hair bound beneath a bronze helm. She stood beside Antony atop a siege tower, offering commands in Greek, Latin, and Egyptian. She was a whirlwind of authority, her voice cutting through the din. "Focus the battering ram on the northwest gate. Pull the archers on the eastern wall." With a thunderous crack, the gate splintered. Legionaries poured through the breach, shields locked like gears. The defenders fought fiercely, but were quickly overwhelmed. Antony strode into the city's central plaza as trumpets blared. He raised his sword, and the banners of Egypt and Rome fluttered side by side from the half-collapsed temple of Juno. Citizens emerged from hiding, their eyes wide. Antony addressed them. "You are free to live in your homes, trade in your markets, worship in your temples. Let no man say that Antony takes without giving back." A cheer rose, cautious at first, then more certain. Yet victory came at a cost. Flames licked the outskirts, and the smell of smoke tainted the sweet air. On the shore, Cleopatra's ships were pelted by stray catapult bolts, or perhaps stray drunken youth seeking sport. One vessel burned, and the cries of women and children mingled with the crackle of fire. Antony raced back to the harbor, only to find ashes and half-drowned refugees clinging to driftwood. Rage boiled within him. He rallied his marines, who tore down the culprit taverns and hanged suspects from the gangplanks. The act quelled the panic, but a dark stain remained. As they camped within Tarentum's walls, Antony and Cleopatra sat beneath the ruins of the Forum. She dipped her fingers in a fountain that still flowed, cold, clear water in a world saturated with blood. "We have tasted victory," she murmured, "yet its flavor is bitter." He sat beside her, removing his helmet. "Rome's heart bleeds too, only we have struck first. Tomorrow we march on Rome itself." She closed her eyes. "Do you think the Romans will welcome us as saviors, or tear us apart as barbarians?" His hand found hers. "They will do both. But remember, if we fail, we die. If we succeed, we rewrite history." He paused. "And if we fall, our story will echo through the ages." They clung together in the darkness, two souls defiant against the tide of fate. Beyond the broken arches, the streets were empty, haunted by ghosts of more peaceful times. The moon peeked through ragged clouds, casting Tarentum in silver and shadow. Somewhere a dog howled, a lone witness to their promise. Dawn would bring armies. It would bring Octavian's golden eagles, shining like stars on a mission. It would bring the Senate's final decrees, pitched battle lines, and the thunder of cavalry. Antony and Cleopatra, bound by love and ambition, would stand at the head of legions and fleets, poised to challenge the root of power itself. The gamble was supreme, the risk absolute. They would claim their place at the hearth of Rome, or their names would be cursed by victors and martyrs alike. In that charged stillness, Antony breathed in the scent of olive and ash. Cleopatra rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his heart hammer against her ear. The world beyond Tarentum held its breath too, waiting for the thunder that would shake the foundations of empire. And as the first light of dawn gilded broken columns, the theater of history braced for its next and perhaps final act. Dawn arrived like a spiteful critic, ripping the silken veil of night to expose lines of legionaries and allied cavalry assembled before Rome's gates. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, dust, and fear, an unwholesome perfume that clung to armor and topson, reminding every man that today the world would be remade or shattered. At the forefront, Antony stood tall in a breastplate scorched by catapult fire, Cleopatra at his side in war dress trimmed with Egyptian lapis. Their shadows stretched long across the broken pavement as they surveyed the city that had birthed and now threatened to bury their greatest ambitions. 10 years, Antony muttered, a voice low enough for only his queen to hear. 10 years of whispers and war, and now the cradle of our end stands before us. He offered a rueful smile. Or our new beginning. Cleopatra raised an eyebrow, perched on the steps of a battered siege tower. It's a lovely city, if you ignore the political turmoil, the stench of sewage, and the occasional mob wielding pitchforks. She tapped her chariot whip against the marble. "In my experience, nothing says dynamic leadership like a fresh siege." A torus-shaped horn blast shattered the momentary levity. The eastern flank, commanded by Armenian horsemen and Parthian archers, unfurled its standards in glinting arrays. The western flank, a motley host of Egyptians, Syrians, and liberated gladiators, formed lines of spears and oval shields. In the center, two cohorts of Antony's veterans, those who had tasted Parthian steel and Phoenician wine, stood with silent defiance. Their eyes, hollowed by hardship, still burned with the memory of Tarentum's flames. The plan, as always, balanced on a razor's edge. Antony would attack the Porta Capena gate with battering rams and siege towers, while Cleopatra's ships closed off the Tiber's mouth, cutting supply lines from the sea. Meanwhile, covert detachments of Greek mercenaries would infiltrate aqueducts and sabotage Rome's water supply. As for the Senate, they would await Cleopatra's emissaries, hand-picked nobles whose gratitude for future grain shipments would outweigh any lingering loyalty to Octavian's nephew. "Let's remind them who holds the wheat," Cleopatra quipped, adjusting the diadem woven into her braid. "And who holds the swords?" With that, the signal was given. The towers groaned forward, creaking on wooden rollers greased with olive oil. Catapults hurled flaming pitch, igniting the city walls in sporadic bursts of orange. The sky filled with the whine of arrows, some falling in lethal arcs, others plinking off armor like angry raindrops. On the walls, defenders, sons of Rome born to tame the world, loosed javelins and hurled rocks, raining curses upon the invaders in a dialect that poisoned the ears. Antony's ram struck first, smashing through charred timbers to crack the gate's iron bands. A cheer rose, half triumphant, half desperate. Legionaries surged, shields interlocking, swords hacking at chains until the gates tore open with a shudder that rattled the city. Inside, a living wall of Roman citizens, poor whores, street urchins, veteran centurions, and patrician senators alike, pressed against the breach, their faces masks of fury and dread. Amid the press, Cleopatra dismounted near the riverbank. She strode forward, staff aloft, flanked by mounted lancers whose feathered helmets bobbed with each step. The river patrolled by her galleys lay behind her like a writhing serpent of oars and purple sails. She raised her voice, cultivated silk rising above the clash of steel. People of Rome, I offer respite from war, grain, medicine, and the chance to heal wounds. Her words drifted over stones slick with blood. Join us, and your city may yet breathe free of civil strife. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the crowd surged inward, some in anger, some in hope, some curious whether an Egyptian queen could deliver on promises while standing in their form amid oaken statues of their own gods. Senators in togas stained with mud and blood pressed forward, eyes darting between Cleopatra's regal mask and the broken statues around them. A voice rang out, Cicero's grandson perhaps, accusing her of witchcraft, of betraying the Republic for the decadence of the Nile. Mistaking volume for victory, he advanced, toga flapping. Cleopatra's laugh rang out, low and dangerous. She stepped close, staff tapping the ground. Young noble, she said, voice silk over steel, I bring you what Rome's leaders have failed to provide, stability. Or do you prefer the fate of Carthage? Memories burned, salt heaped upon the earth. The mob stiffened. Memories of past wars are long and bitter. The young noble paled. Others whispered, famine in Sicily, broken Italy, legions bogged down in endless purges. Cleopatra's words, though sharp, cut truth. In that instant, Antony's cohorts burst through the shattered gate, meeting defenders in brutal street fighting. Shields splintered, swords dripped, and the air brimmed with the metallic tang of spilled life. The Senate House loomed ahead, pillared, imposing, and ringed by stone eagles whose wings looked poised to take flight. Antony turned to his lieutenant. Secure the Senate. Let no senator escape to rally the masses. The lieutenant saluted and vanished into the smoke. Meanwhile, Cleopatra's archers climbed upon the broken statues of Mars and Venus, knocking arrows at the gates of the Senate courtyard. She beckoned to the burning dais. Release the hostages, the families of senators. A captured lictor, hooded and trembling, was dragged forward and forced to read proclamations of clemency. The crowd gasped. Clemency from an enemy tasted sweeter than victory, and many citizens found themselves swayed not by steel but by mercy. At midday, the Senate chamber became a theater of absurd drama. Antony's captains marched in, flanked by burning torches and the clatter of swords. Senators, faces drained of color, rose uncertainly. The consuls, too proud to kneel, instead offered trembling speeches about the necessity of negotiations. Antony listened, arms crossed, as one senator vouched for Rome's safety under his rule, provided that Octavian's name be struck from every monument and that Antony be hailed as imperator for life. Cleopatra stood at his side, eyes narrowing. Only they knew what pact would be twisted into law once ink dried on papyrus. But while the high-stakes game unfolded in marble corridors, the streets told a grimmer tale. Rampant looting by ragged auxiliaries mingled with acts of genuine relief as Egyptian physicians tended the wounded. A Syrian archer traded arrows for bread crusts. A freed gladiator offered protection to terrified merchants. The line between savior and conqueror blurred in the eyes of those who only sought a roof and a crust of food. By afternoon, a procession of senators, their togas draped over bruised limbs, emerged to accept Cleopatra's terms. A single scribe recorded each concession: a new grain levy in Egypt's favor, a permanent naval base at Alexandria, full citizenship rights for Antony's veterans, and the retroactive annulment of all Octavian's decrees. Rome's heart beat unevenly as the ancient republic bowed to the most unlikely of victors. Antony raised his sword. "Let this day be known," he proclaimed, voice echoing off the forum's shattered pillars, "as the dawn of a new order, one forged by steel, tempered by mercy, and sealed by the union of East and West." A cheer rose, ragged but genuine, as citizens and soldiers alike recognized that history's pendulum had swung violently and perhaps irreversibly. Yet triumph tasted bitter. In the temple of Saturn, priests wept at the desecrated altars. In the markets, freed slaves and exiles huddled in feverish debates over the future. And high above, on the Palatine Hill, shadows gathered. News arrived that Octavian, refusing to accept defeat, had rallied the legions of northern Italy, marching south with blinding speed. The consul Lepidus, uneasy at Antony's ascendancy, had opened negotiations with Octavian for a coup in Rome itself. Even Ptolemy, Cleopatra's brother, whispered doubts, hedging his loyalties should fortune shift again. As dusk fell, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to the Basilica Julia, repurposed as their command hall. Tapestries of Egyptian linen hung beside Roman frescoes. Incense smoke curled alongside the flicker of unaccustomed candles. The maps sprawled across tables, dotted with notes of grants, garrisons, and grain shipments. Their generals leaned in, faces drawn and weary. Cleopatra watched through a shattered window as the city lights blinked, less in celebration and more in nervous expectancy. "We've broken Rome," she whispered, voice raw. "But have we saved it?" Antony joined her, folding an arm around her waist. His gaze swept the skyline, the Capitol, the Circus Maximus beyond, the silhouette of the Colosseum, still under construction yet already humming with rumor. "We've rewritten its rules," he replied. "Now we must write the next chapter." The queen laid her head on his shoulder. "And what if Octavian storms the gates once more?" Her question hung like a guillotine blade. He kissed her hair. "Then we fight again. Empires are never won in a day or in a single siege. Today we hold Rome. Tomorrow we shape its soul." He paused. "But tonight, we grieve." He led her to a small altar erected for the victors, where they lit torches in memory of the fallen, Roman, Egyptian, Greek, and barbarian alike. Each flame flickered with stories of sacrifice and absurdity, of men who died for causes they barely understood. A lone trumpeter sounded a lament that rolled through ruined columns and empty forms. In its notes was the irony of triumph, that to conquer Rome is to awaken its ghosts. Cleopatra closed her eyes, feeling the cold bite of loss even amid victory. Antony stood behind her, silent and burdened, knowing that power's crown cut deep. So ended the final act of their grand drama, at least the final act they would live to see. For history, in its merciless appetite, would not rest. Octavian's shadow crept closer, alliances would fracture, and the dream of a Rome united under Pharaoh in general would collapse under the weight of old grudges and new betrayals. But for this night, the city lay under their rule, its lights dancing in tribute or in warning. And as the hour grew late, Antony and Cleopatra, two souls entwined by love, ambition, and absurd fate, stood together on the steps of power, the world at their feet, in the world's weight heavy upon them. The curtain had fallen, but even now the final scene had yet to play out. Imagine being born into a family so obsessed with keeping their bloodlines pure that your first cousins become your spouses, your uncles become your in-laws, and your family reunions double as genetic stress tests. Welcome to the world of the Habsburgs, where love was measured in degrees of consanguinity and dental deformities became a royal fashion statement. Now, buckle up, because we're about to dive into a saga of awkward family gatherings, questionable wedding invites, and the slow, inexorable march of inherited defects, all sprinkled with enough irony to make even a court jester blush. From the outset, the Habsburg dynasty was a masterclass in keep it in the family. When Rudolf I snatched the imperial title in the 13th century, he probably never envisioned that his descendants would spend centuries puzzling over marriage, contracts. Shall we match Archduke Ferdinand's hemophilia with Countess Maria's cleft chin, while the rest of Europe raised eyebrows? They married nieces to uncles, cousins to each other, and in one particularly bold move, an aunt to her nephew. Invitations to family weddings read like twisted genealogical puzzles. You're invited to the nuptials of your granddaughter and husband's sister, RSVP by royal decree. But why such devotion to incestuous alliances? It wasn't just a bizarre obsession with pedigree purity, it was politics on stilts. By marrying within their own ranks, the Habsburgs boasted holdings that spread from Austria to Spain, the Netherlands to Hungary, all linked by the sticky bonds of family ties. Each wedding was less about romance and more about real estate. "I'll give you Brabant if your daughter marries my son," they'd whisper over goblets of questionable vintage. "Sure, you risk congenital heart defects, but hey, land." Let's skip ahead to Charles V, the man who inherited more titles before his 20th birthday than most people do in a lifetime. He was Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, Archduke of Austria, Duke of Milan, and Lord of the Netherlands, all thanks to a complex web of Habsburg marriages. But Charles's brilliance came at a price. His jaw, known as the Habsburg lip, protruded so dramatically that he could bite his own tongue, a striking testament to generations of inbreeding. Portraits show him with such an exaggerated underbite that even his contemporaries joked he looked like a vampire who forgot to floss. Meanwhile, across the Alps, Ferdinand I and his brood continued the tradition. Archduke Maximilian II married his first cousin Maria of Spain. Then his son Rudolf II married his niece. Yes, gross by modern standards, but hey, dynastic duty called. Rudolf himself was a peculiar blend of genius and madness. He spoke multiple languages, collected grotesque curiosities from around the world, and reportedly spent hours weeping in chapel confessions, fearing divine retribution for his sinful unions. And yet, he remained single. Funny how a family tree full of tangled limbs can lead to the odd bachelor. Then there's the infamous family portrait of Philip II of Spain. He stands stiffly beside his second wife, his niece Anna of Austria. You can see the tension. Philip's already carrying the genetic baggage of hemophilia in his veins, while Anna's own family line is practically a looping knot. Their children were predicted to inherit every curse in the royal catalogue. Some took after Philip and died young, while others, like the unlucky Prince Ferdinand, suffered developmental delays so severe he was excluded from succession. One can only imagine the awkward Christmas dinners. "Pass the turkey, son, and hand me the hemophilia pamphlet, please." Yet, if you thought one generation of incest was enough, the Habsburgs piled on more. Emperor Leopold I, brother to the ill-fated Philip II, married his niece, Margaret Teresa, who was not only his niece, but also the subject of Diego Velázquez's famous painting, where she's decked out in lace and looking very bored. Their children, unsurprisingly, were a parade of health issues, miscarriages, stillbirths, and children who never reached adulthood. Leopold's nephew, Charles II, the final Habsburg king of Spain, was so physically and mentally disabled that he could barely speak, had a hunched back, and suffered crippling epileptic fits. Spain's economy collapsed under his reign, partly because nobody wanted to marry his daughter and unify the kingdoms again, fearing another genetic disaster. By the late 17th century, the family motto Bella geran Ali to Felix Austria nub, let others wage war, you, happy Austria, wed, had backfired spectacularly. The Habsburg pedigree was now less about celebration and more about cautionary tale. Behold, the cost of too much family fun. Catholic Europe whispered behind gloved hands, clergy blessed the state but dreaded the royal confessional lines, and commoners popped up pamphlets titled How to Avoid Your Uncle, satirical guides warning of the perils of dynastic matchmaking. And yet, for all the horror show genetics, the Habsburgs persisted. They held onto their thrones, fended off Ottoman sieges at Vienna, patronized Mozart, and presided over Enlightenment salons. Their courts balmy with extravagance, walls lined with tapestries the size of small forests, and the smell of civet musk wafting through gilded chambers. You could almost forget the hidden tragedies in the nursery wings, the hushed sobs over yet another sickly heir, the desperate prayers offered by wet nurses who knew the odds were stacked against their charges. So what lessons can we glean from this twisted fairy tale? First, that power is incredibly seductive, but often comes at the expense of common sense. Second, that even the noblest among us, emperors, archdukes, and kings, are subject to biology's ruthless arithmetic. And third, that awkward family reunions, royal addition, are best left to fiction. Because when your grandpa is also your great-uncle, you don't just need a family tree, you need a family forest fire to clear the mess. But before we let the Habsburgs' incestuous legacy fade into dusty textbooks, consider this. Our modern understanding of genetics owes much to their tragic history. The very notion of dominant and recessive traits was mapped out by observers fascinated and horrified by the Habsburg jawlines and stunted heirs. Mendel planted peas, but Europe's royal families provided the macabre laboratories. Now, as you tuck yourself into bed tonight, safe in the glow of your non-incestuous linens, remember the Habsburgs and their endless awkward gatherings. Picture a banquet where every guest wears the same face, cries, "Happy birthday, niece, cousin, wife," and then complains about indigestion caused by too many degrees of separation. It's proof that sometimes power untempered by prudence can lead to nothing but absurdity and sorrow. So raise a glass to the Habsburgs. May their jawlines rest in peace, and may our family trees remain delightfully branched. Brace yourself for even more jaw-dropping genealogy gymnastics as we dive headfirst into the Habsburg labyrinth of alliances, betrayals, and physical deformities that could double as dark comedy. If you thought fitting fourth cousins once removed on wedding invitations was tough, wait till you see what happens when your emperor marries his own niece, and then wonders why his heirs look like they've been mauled by a wood chipper. Welcome back to the dynasty that made share your toys look like child's play and turned family business into a life or death affair. Here's part 2 of our saga of royal incest and endless awkward reunions. The scene opens in the grand halls of Vienna circa 1650, where Emperor Ferdinand III, fresh off defending Christendom against Ottoman hordes, contemplates the less glamorous front of dynastic warfare, securing an heir who doesn't resemble a bulldog, chewing hair. Ferdinand married his first cousin, Maria Anna of Spain, because nothing says healthy gene pool like a bride whose grandparents are also your grandparents. Their children inherited everything from Habsburg chins to Habsburg hearts, prone to pleurisy and pox. When Ferdinand's eldest son, Leopold I, rose to the throne in 1658, Europe collectively held its breath. Would history repeat, or would someone finally have the sense to wed beyond the immediate family? Spoiler, they didn't. Leopold I, King of Hungary, Bohemia, and, at some point, the mild annoyance of his courtiers doubled down on the consanguineous strategy. First, he wed his cousin, Margaret Teresa of Spain, whose portrait by Velázquez immortalizes her as a porcelain doll with the world's most lethal cheekbones and chronic respiratory issues. 20 years old and already a veteran of miscarriages, Margaret Teresa gave birth to Maria Antonia, Maria Magdalena, and, lastly, only one son who survived past infancy, Joseph. The family tree's branches were less tree and more gnarled briar patch, but by now the Habsburg rulers were too proud to see the forest for their own chins. Margaret Teresa's early death at 21 left Leopold a widower with 3 daughters and a son, all bearing the genetic marks of a dynasty that refused to diversify. He next married Claudia Felicitas of Austria, his niece, naturally, in hopes of boosting his heir count, but the children of this union either died at birth or in toddlerhood. Historical records blithely note postpartum fever as the culprit, but we all know it's the pedigree playing a cruel game of roulette with their lives. Leopold's only surviving legitimate son, Joseph I, succeeded him in 1705, still sporting the trademark Habsburg jaw that makes portraiture as much a public service announcement about inbreeding as it is flattery. Joseph married Wilhelmine Amalia of Brunswick-Lüneburg for yet more mutual kinship ties and bore 2 daughters who both died in childhood, plus 2 sons, Charles and Leopold. Cue another chorus of sighs. Great! Another generation of rulers whose facial structure appears custom-built to interfere with speech. Joseph I's premature death in 1711 thrust his brother, Charles VI, onto the throne. Charles was determined to break the cycle of premature dynastic extinction. He issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713, daring European powers to recognize his daughter as heir. Cue laughter in the courts of France and Bavaria, because no one takes an only daughter seriously when her lineage looks like a family reunion gone wrong. But Charles was undeterred. He married his niece, again, Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, and hoped that one of their children might defy Habsburg odds. They produced Maria Theresa, born 1717, destined to become perhaps the dynasty's most famous ruler, and over a dozen siblings, most of whom died young. Maria Theresa herself survived, but with a hooked nose, deformed spine, and a perpetual susceptibility to carriage accidents. Yet she had something her forebears lacked: sheer force of will. When Charles VI died in 1740, the pragmatic sanction put her on the throne of the sprawling Habsburg domains, from the Alps to the Danube, and from Bohemia to Lombardy. Cue the War of the Austrian Succession as neighboring monarchs smelled weakness and prepared to carve off chunks of her inheritance. Maria Theresa met the challenge head-on, aided by her husband Francis Stephen of Lorraine, technically an outsider, but an excellent diplomatic pawn whose marriage certificate likely scrawled required to produce fresh, non-Habsburg blood. They had 16 children, an impressive brood by any standard, though sadly not all lived to adulthood. Among them, Joseph II, who would become Holy Roman Emperor, Leopold II, another emperor, Marie Antoinette, forever doomed to the French Revolution's guillotine, and Maria Carolina, Queen of Naples and Sicily. Note the injection of external genes: Lorraine, Bourbon, and Naples. Finally, a hint of diversification, though the family still wed first cousins as a casual pastime. Under Maria Theresa's rule, the Habsburg state modernized its army, reformed its bureaucracy, and even flirted with enlightened ideas, while ensuring the succession stayed firmly within the brood. Portraits from this era feature her children in elaborate wigs and powdered faces, looking like porcelain dolls gussied up for a funeral. They bore the signature Habsburg jaw and signs of inbreeding such as clubfoot, intellectual disabilities, and a troubling fondness for seafaring potatoes. Her son, Joseph II, ever the reformer, abolished serfdom and championed religious tolerance, unlikely legacies from a dynasty best known for restricting the gene pool. He married a Spanish princess, another relative, but at least a generation removed this time, and fathered no children, choosing instead to swivel his attention between statecraft and scandalous affairs. His brother Leopold II succeeded him in 1790, continuing the tradition of marrying close kin, Maria Luisa of Spain, his first cousin, because when your uncles are siblings of your new spouse, genealogists weep. Leopold II's brief reign culminated in the convulsions of the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette's tragic fate, beheaded for her alleged extravagance, cast a long dark shadow on the Habsburg name. Yet the dynasty persisted through Napoleon's conquests and the reshaping of Europe at Vienna in 1815. Francis II, also Francis I of Austria, dissolved the Holy Roman Empire under Napoleon's guns, then reconstituted his domains into the Austrian Empire. He married 4 times, yes, 4, first to Elizabeth of Lorraine, his cousin, then to Maria Ludovica of Austria-Est, another cousin once removed, to Caroline Augusta of Bavaria, a lesser-known relation, and finally to Maria Theresa of Naples and Sicily, a Bourbon tie intended to patch alliances. Each marriage churned the inbreeding mill anew, but the Cipollino of Europe kept spinning. By mid-19th century, Emperor Franz Joseph III ascended in 1848, marrying his cousin Elizabeth Sisi of Bavaria. Unlike his predecessors, he reformed the empire's structure into the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, hoping to quiet nationalist stirrings. Another kind of political alliance, this time more bureaucratic than genetic. He and Sisi had 4 children, but only one son survived to adulthood, Archduke Rudolf. Rudolf's marriage to Stephanie of Belgium added a non-Habsburg touch, yet their son died by suicide amid scandal. The male line of the senior Habsburgs faltered. The empire itself would collapse in 1918, casualties not of inbreeding, but of world war and nationalist fervor. Yet the Habsburgs never quite vanished. Otto von Habsburg, son of the last emperor, lived into the 21st century, decrying nationalism and advocating for a united Europe. Ironic for a man whose ancestors literally united kingdoms by wedlock. He married Princess Regina of Saxe-Meiningen, another cousin, which brings our story full circle. Even in modernity, breaking the habit was harder than breaking an empire. So what have we learned, dear viewers, from this twisted tapestry of unions tighter than spandex on a sumo wrestler? First, that power obsesses the mind in ways that can warp body and soul. Second, that inbreeding is nature's way of refusing your invitations to the party of life. And third, that family reunions are best enjoyed when your guests don't share 25% of their DNA with you. If you ever receive a wedding invite stamped by order of the emperor, check the guest list for relatives. If they're all closely related, maybe RSVP no. As the Habsburg saga draws to a close, Remember their legacy not only in palaces and parliaments, but in genetics, textbooks, and cautionary folktales. From Rudolph's first imperial crown to Otto's final breath, the dynasty's story is one of ambition outpacing wisdom and love of a very peculiar sort, doomed by human frailty. Raise a glass of that fine Austrian wine. Just maybe ensure your vineyard isn't run by your cousin's 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 cousin. Here's to the Habsburgs. May their chins rest easy, and may your family tree stay gloriously gnarled rather than tragically twisted. Picture this: a glittering ballroom in 1873 Vienna, gas lights flickering on Rococo plasterwork, and there you are, faced with the grim task of choosing a bride. You have precisely 3 sane options, all first cousins, 2 second cousins, and 1 great aunt. Which do you pick? Welcome back to the Habsburg family soap opera, where every marriage license reads like a genetic dare. By the time Emperor Franz Joseph I sat uneasily on the throne, the family tree looked less like genealogy and more like a hand grenade with too many pins. His bride, Elizabeth Sisi of Bavaria, brought a breath of fresh air, until you realized Bavaria was still a German duchy, kin to the Austrian throne by more than a few degrees. Their firstborn, Sophie, was blighted by the family's signature-pronounced jaw and died in infancy. Only Rudolph, their son, lived to chafe against the dynasty's suffocating rules, until his tragic suicide in 1889 cast a pall of scandal over the court, a grim reminder that a Habsburg life could be as brittle as damask silk. With no male heir, the succession passed to Franz Joseph's brother, Archduke Karl Ludwig, who himself had tangled marital vines, first to Princess Margaretha of Saxony, then to Princess Maria Annunziata of Bourbon II Sicilies. Each union replenished the genetic stew with more Bourbon chin and Sicilian complexion, but no lasting sons. When Karl Ludwig died in 1896, his son, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, popped to the top of the list, ushering us into part 3 of this absurdist tulip of consanguinity. Franz Ferdinand, the heir presumptive, was a curious blend of reformist zeal and dynastic fatalism. His marriage to Sophie Chotek in 1900 was the scandal of Europe. She was noble, but not Habsburg-level noble. The imperial court refused to grant her the full status of archduchess, condemning their children to lesser titles and dashed hopes. Imagine marrying the love of your life only to learn your offspring are barred from the very throne you're destined to occupy. The awkward Thanksgiving dinners that followed must have made Victorian etiquette manuals weep. In Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, the most tragic and ironically foreseeable chapter of the Habsburg saga opened. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, in a car bedecked with imperial flags, were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a young Bosnian Serb militant. Their deaths triggered the avalanche of alliances and declarations that exploded into the First World War. It was, in the bitterest sense, a family drama of catastrophic proportions, dynastic disputes, nationalisms unbound, and an empire crumbling faster than you could count your degrees of separation. As the war ground on, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a patchwork of Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Romanians, Croats, Serbs, Slovens, Italians, and Jews, began to tear at the seams. Food shortages, military defeats, and rising nationalist fervor transformed once grand court balls into gauntlets of propaganda and suspicion. The Court Chronicle from 1917 records a luncheon where Emperor Charles I, Franz Joseph's successor, inquired politely after a Czech noble's health, only to be hissed at in Czech by other guests. One can only imagine the soup broth growing cold amidst that tension. Charles I, Karl, himself, was an Habsburg by the narrowest of margins. He was Franz Joseph's grandnephew, whose grandmother was the emperor's sister. His wife, Zita of Bourbon-Parma, added Bourbon genes into the already crowded mix. They married loyally and bore 8 children, scattering them like hopeful acorns into a world that was burning. Charles tried to negotiate peace, famously sending secret envoys to the Allies in 1917, but the very notion of an Habsburg emperor reaching across battle lines to end the war struck many in his own court as treason. By late 1918, the once mighty dual monarchy collapsed. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Italy, all snatched territory from Vienna's grasp. On November 11, 1918, Emperor Charles signed an armistice that would become the Habsburg dynasty's final decree in power. He briefly refused to abdicate, insisting he could be a neutral federal sovereign, but the revolutions roared too loud. He left Vienna in October 1918, and the Habsburg reign ended quietly, overshadowed by the horrors of trench warfare and revolution. The monarchy's final funeral procession was less a crown raised in sorrow and more an anachronistic parade of mourning uniforms. Exiled in Switzerland, Charles watched as Europe redrew its maps. The Allied powers demanded he renounce all claims to the throne. He refused. From the island prison of Madeira, he wrote last desperate manifestos and died in 1922 of Spanish influenza, compounded by malnutrition and heartbreak. Thus, the last reigning Habsburg emperor left behind 8 children, each holding to a claim as fragile as their own health. Let's not forget Otto von Habsburg, Charles's eldest son, who grew up in exile and became the 20th century's most persistent Habsburg. Educated in political science, fluent in 8 languages, and a member of the European Parliament for Germany, Otto sought redemption for the family name. He married Princess Regina of Saxe-Meiningen, another cousin of course, and had 7 children. His life spanned more than a century. He died in 2011 at age 98, leaving behind a legacy of continental unity that contrasted sharply with the dynastic fragmentation that had doomed his ancestors. Meanwhile, the other branches of the family, Austria's Habsburg-Lorraines, Spain's Bourbon-Habsburg descendants, even the old Savoy and Wittelsbach houses, jockeyed for titles and trivialities. Ducal claims, chivalric orders, pension rights, and cabin tickets on royal cruises became the new battlegrounds. The war had ended the empire, but it had not ended the insistence that a Habsburg-born child was somehow more special than yours or mine, just more likely to need corrective jaw surgery. Let's zoom in on a few of the most colorful exiles. Robert, Archduke of Austria-Est, who fled to Indianapolis in the 1950s and ran a furniture store. Felix, who became a Belgian industrialist, and his brother, Karl Ludwig, who managed family estates in the US, and Michael, who led the Order of Malta, ensuring that the Habsburg penchant for titles lived on in charitable and occasionally arcane ceremonials. Each of these men carried the family lore of grand palaces and crown jewels in their minds, even as they navigated mid-century suburban life. The family's women, too, carved places in modernity. Archduchess Regina became a Benedictine nun, while her cousins joined relief agencies and cultural societies. Archduchess Gabriella of Austria married into the Greco-Belgian banking dynasties, blending Habsburg stubbornness with financial acumen. Their offspring, bearing names like Maria Anna, Elizabeth, and Karl, turned the royal naming conventions into a full-contact sport. Genetic scientists today look back on the Habsburgs with a mix of horror and fascination. The so-called Habsburg jaw persisted for centuries, a mandibular prognathism so pronounced that it grabbed the image of the entire dynasty. Researchers have traced hemophilia through Queen Victoria's line and the Ishmael-like wanderings of Bourbon Habsburg descendants. Family trees are now digital, color-coded, and geotagged. Turns out your great-great-great-granduncle marrying your great-aunt's cousin leads to an algorithmic nightmare for genealogists. But beyond jaws and hemophilia, the modern Habsburg diaspora embraces causes far divorced from the courtly intrigues of old. Archduke Sandor Franz Ferdinand, great-grandnephew of the assassinated heir, is a scholar of Balkan history. His cousin, Archduchess Henriette, works in environmental law in Brussels. Another branch manages vineyards in Slovenia and Austria, their Tokaj and Gruner Veltliner far more celebrated than the Bronze Age bronzes of their ancestors' trophies of conquest. In 2011, when Otto died, world media covered the funeral in Vienna with reverent nostalgia. Thousands lined the streets, some to peer at the imperial cortege, others to wonder what it truly means to be royal in a republic. His coffin rested in Sens, Stephen's Cathedral, a final nod to a dynasty that had once defined Europe. The slogan, "Tu Felix Austria Nub," was whispered as mourners passed, not "Happy Austria, wed," but "Happy Austria, rest." Today, the Habsburg name survives in institutions, the Habsburg Society for Cultural Heritage, the Ottonian Circle for European Unity, and the archducal holdings that manage art collections and family archives. Conferences gather historians and lay descendants alike to pore over vellum letters and embroidered gowns, as if hoping to resurrect some spark of imperial grandeur. Meanwhile, social media groups quietly debate who's the rightful head of the house. Franz, Karl, Georg, each claim backed by genealogical trees more tangled than the family's original rootstock. And what of the peasantry, the artisans, the soldiers who served under the Habsburg banners? Their blood mingled with the dynastic lines every bit as much as royal marrow. When genealogists scan modern DNA, they find small percentages of Habsburg markers in everyone from Croatian fishermen to Czech vintners. It's as if the monarchy never really died, it simply seeped into the veins of Europe, leaving a faint but enduring legacy of both brilliance and madness. So where does that leave us? With a 4-part epic that began in the Gothic shadows of medieval castles, marched through Renaissance courts and Baroque palaces, lurched into the trenches of the Great War, and finally settled into suburban boardrooms and digital archives. The family that once commanded armies and sat on thrones now presides over think tanks and charity galas. Their everyday struggles, identity, purpose, the occasional lurch of family scandal, are as mundane as anyone else's, yet tinged with the patina of centuries. As you click away from this tale, perhaps scratching your jaw in sympathy, ask yourself, is power worth the cost of blood so narrow it beggars belief? Can a dynasty endure on memory alone, or does it require the living pulse of influence and authority? The Habsburgs answered these questions not with words, but with marriages. Hundreds of them, each more audacious than the last. Their story is a testament to humanity's greatest aspirations and its fatal flaws. The drive to connect, to claim, and to conquer, even when the price is written in DNA and etched deep into the jawbones of history. Their empire lay in tatters, yet like an aging aristocrat, they refused to relinquish their titles or their sense of grandeur. Part 4 begins with a hook you probably didn't expect. Imagine being chased through a burning palace by your own great-uncle, who's screaming that you've insulted his great-great-grandmother's portrait, and that if you don't hand over the family jewels, so he'll divulge every secret you ever texted. Welcome to the final act of the Habsburg saga, where the dust of empires mingles with the absurdity of intrafamilial vendettas, and where the bones of kings still clatter with laughter at how power can warp both mind and marriage license. The year is 1919, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire has collapsed like a souffle in an earthquake. Emperor Karl I, once determined to cling to a constitutional compromise, now finds himself with no home to reign over except a derelict villa in Madeira. He spends his days pacing dim corridors, endlessly drafting manifestos that begin with, "By the grace of God," but have nowhere to deliver. His wife Zita consoles him with news that their children, Otto, Robert, Felix, and the rest, are safely ensconced in Swiss boarding schools, blissfully unaware of the dynastic dumpster fire behind them. Meanwhile, back in Central Europe, the rump Habsburg Lorraines hold clandestine meetings in cafes under assumed names, drinking espresso instead of claret, plotting how to retain their forbidden property. Ever since the new Republic of Austria passed the Habsburg law expelling all members of the dynasty, unless they renounced claims and swallowed bitter Republican medicine, every archduke is a wanted man, at least on paper. Police memoranda describe them as nuisance aristocrats, liable to incite nostalgia riots among drunks in Viennese back alleys. The idea of Crown Prince Otto is reduced to a caricature, a dude in corduroy trousers handing out birthday balloons. Across the border, Hungary's Regent Horthy keeps another branch of the family at arm's length. Archduke Joseph August, nephew of Karl, served loyally in World War I and was briefly head of state in 1919. Horthy removed him with polite yet firm gestures. Joseph's descendants now run a handful of vineyards in Transylvania, one of Europe's oddest roles for princes reduced to vintners, but the grapes never lie. Their 2012 vintage even won a sommelier award, though local legend insists the secret ingredient is tears shed over decapitated thrones. In Spain, the Bourbon Habsburg legacy endures through pale faces in Madrid salons. Archduke Karl's sister, Renata, married into the House of Bourbon to Sicilies. Her grandchildren attend bullfights and post selfies on Instagram under @royal and still kicking. They wave Spanish flags not from loyalty, but because the Habsburg crown once wore Iberian jewels like a piñata. Every once in a while, a Spanish politician invites them to a tapas reception, mostly for photo ops. They smile politely, knowing that their real claim to fame is the occasional cameo in Netflix's European Royals You Forgot. Over in Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, the Habsburg name is a footnote in history textbooks. A generation ago, a group of Czech punk rockers released a single called Habsburg Jaw in My Face, a raging anthem about escaping ancestral curses. It climbed the underground charts, peaking at number 4 in Prague's basement clubs. Meanwhile, in Serbia, a secret society of history buffs preserved Habsburg archives they smuggled out of Sarajevo in 1914. They treat those yellowed letters like holy relics, ceremonially passing them around like sacramental wafers while chanting dates in Latin. But the real legacy lies in the geneticist's labs. From Vienna's Medical University to Stanford's Genome Center, researchers dissect the DNA that once made jaws jut and hemophilia flow. They use computer models to simulate what might have happened if the Habsburgs had simply married outside their first cousin circles. Alternate timeline, healthy Spanish royals experiments they call them. The results spark academic seminars titled Emergency Gene Rescue in Dynastic Lines and TED Talks about the perils of too much family loyalty. The irony is rich. Modern science owes its pedigree partly to centuries of royal folly. Yet even as their political power vanished, the Habsburgs managed one last conquest, the conquest of memory. Their sprawling palaces, Schönbrunn, Hofburg, Belvedere, are now museums teeming with tourists clicking selfies at every gilded corner. They gape at Maria Theresa's ceremonial carriage and Rudolph's stuffed menagerie from Prague Castle. They marvel at baby Marie Antoinette's christening robe or Charles Thuller's codpiece. Yes, it survives. They buy postcards of the famed Habsburg jaw, an ironic souvenir that says, "I visited the dynasty of incest and all I got was this slight mandibular ailment." Guides speaking in 15 languages recount how these rulers waged wars, reformed laws, and patronized Mozart and Beethoven, but inevitably circle back to, and incidentally, they were closely related. School groups erupt in giggles at awkward facts. Emperor Leopold I was married to his niece, then his niece, then his niece. Again, talk about recycling. The guests snap photos of portraits where siblings pose as brides and grooms, and post them with hashtags like royal family goals, fully unaware that goals here means genetic time bomb. Despite everything, some descendants still cling to the hope of restoration. They petition European courts, sending stacks of birth certificates, marriage contracts, and quotes from Magna Carta to prove their claims. Judges shuffle papers, frown at Latin seals, and gently explain that monarchy is passé, thank you very much. Occasionally, a right-wing fringe party in Austria or Hungary floats the idea of constitutional monarchy, but support hovers in single digits. The public would rather debate the price of avocado toast than untangle Habsburg succession law. However, when Europe's political winds shift, whispers return. In a crisis, the old name carries weight, an image of disciplined authority, pomp, and endless protocol. In 1999, when Austria was reeling from a banking scandal, magazines speculated about a return of the Archduke to restore order. The story sold well until the editors remembered that Otto von Habsburg had renounced his claim back in 1961 and was living in Germany, busy writing op-eds about unity instead of picking up a saber. So what remains? A scattering of chateaux, a handful of heraldic orders still granting knighthoods, for a fee, and a global diaspora bearing the names Habsburg, Habsburg-Lothringen, Austria-Este, and a dozen hyphenated variations. Some run vineyards in California, some teach medieval history in Melbourne, some design Gothic jewelry in Tokyo, inspiration drawn from the double eagle insignia. Their children, born in democracy, sometimes protest their grandparents' empires. Do we really need 18 middle names? They grumble, sporting tattoos of family crests as ironic rebellion. And yet, every so often, someone in the family tree accomplishes something remarkable. An Olympic medalist in fencing, a Stanford neuroscientist, a film director whose indie hit screens at Cannes. They're distant Habsburgs, descendants 3 or 4 generations removed, who carry no legal pretensions but who inherit an inexhaustible lore of drama, tragedy, and jawlines that defy conventional orthodontics. At reunions in a Burgundy chateau, they toast their ancestors not with reverence but with relief. to not marrying your own niece, may it be forever in our genes. By the 21st century's second decade, the Habsburg narrative settles into a curious niche, history's greatest cautionary tale and pop culture curiosity rolled into one. Documentaries stream on Netflix, podcasts dissect every matrimonial treaty, YouTube vloggers tour Habsburg relics wearing VR headsets. Each retelling underlines the same bittersweet truths, that ambition without restraint can entangle you in your own lineage, that power without prudence fractures both realms and rib cages, and that the most enduring empires are those built on ideas, not inbred bloodlines. So here we stand at the edge of this four-part odyssey, our final scene unfolding on a modern street in Vienna, a group of teenagers skateboarding past the Hofburg Palace gates, blasting techno remixes of Mozart's Requiem. Nearby, a street artist spray paints a stylized double eagle on a crumbling wall. A local guide, tablet in hand, streams a live history tour to thousands around the globe. They pause at a plaque commemorating the dynasty. Here stood the Habsburgs, who ruled Europe for centuries, united realms with marriages and united jaws with braces. And as the skaters wheel by, one of them shouts, "Hey, check out that lip," pointing at a statue of Charles V. His friend laughs, classic Habsburg. And just like that, the dynasty's final gift emerges. Not land or titles, not armies or alliances, but a punchline resilient enough to survive centuries of upheaval. Their story ends not in a whimper, but in a beat drop, a remix of history that reminds us power can be fleeting, but absurdity is eternal. So raise whatever drink you have, coffee, tea, Austrian Gruner Veltliner, or a fizzy energy drink, and toast the Habsburgs. To their jawlines, their questionable wedding planners, their endless titular hyphens, and above all, to the grand irony that the longest-running dynasty in European history now lives forever in memes and museum gift shops. Here's to them. May their bones rest, their bloodlines disperse, and may our own family reunions never require a genealogist with a biohazard suit